Chapter 461, Harassment. Nathan's mind raced, but he forced himself to focus. With a quick motion, he drew his longsword and let a faint green aura shimmer across his body. Then, in a blur, he unleashed his instant sword technique. Before Kenomura could regain his footing, Nathan had already reappeared at his side. A brilliant arc of steel cut through the air, aiming straight for Ken's eyes. Stunned, Ken cried out, "Not good!" and desperately rolled away. Nathan had anticipated the dodge. As Ken hit the ground, Nathan launched several razor-sharp shurikens in the same instant. Puff! Puff! The sounds of flesh tearing echoed around them. Ken spotted the deadly projectiles at the last possible moment and tried to deflect them, but two shurikens found their mark in his arms and torso, pinning him in place and sapping his strength. Frozen with pain, Ken barely had time to register Nathan's approach before the glint of the longsword swept in a clean arc. With a single merciless stroke, Nathan severed Kenomura's head. It flew from his body, and a crimson fountain burst from his neck, dyeing the surrounding sea red. Silence fell. Nathan held his sword aloft, the echo of steel on bone still ringing in his ears. Below him, Ken's lifeless body drifted as the blood spread across the waves, a stark testament to the swift fury of Nathan's blade. Nathan didn't even flinch in the face of such a grisly scene. In fact, his focus had shifted elsewhere. At that very moment, the two shadow clones assigned to hold back Kirigakure's reinforcements had collapsed under the combined assault of more than a dozen enemy shinobi. Likewise, of the three clones fighting alongside Nathan against the nearby Kirigakure troops, one had been cut down by Kenomura, and the other two had just dissipated amid the chaos. Not for lack of skill, but because they'd taken reckless risks to finish off their opponents as quickly as possible, an approach that ultimately cost them their lives. Still, their sacrifice had paid off. The local Kirigakure Chunin were now all but eradicated, and among the Jonin, after Nathan slew Akabane Yosuke and Omura Ken in swift succession, only a single shinobi remained, the clan's special Jonin, famed for his extraordinary perceptive talents. Nathan's eyes cut sharply toward his challenger. In an instant, he brushed aside the enemy before him and sprinted toward the Kirigakure Jonin racing to his aid. He didn't try to hold them back. By the time they arrived, intervention would have been futile and, frankly, unnecessary. Looking up at the dozen Kirigakure Jonin surrounding him, Nathan gauged their chakra signatures and auras. At least 5 of them were Jonin-rank shinobi, more than enough to handle any remaining Konoha survivors in the area. Confident in their strength, he spoke just loud enough for the nearest Jonin to hear. "I'll leave the rest to you." Before the stunned Konoha ninjas could react, Nathan's hand shot up into a hand seal. With a sudden rush of wind, he unleashed his technique, wind style, wind wings, and vaulted skyward. As he ascended, the astonished onlookers watched him streak across the sky toward the Kirigakure warship. The hidden mist vessels plowed ahead, unrelenting, even as Nathan raced to catch up. They finally understood that Nathan hadn't been acting ruthlessly. He was focused on a far more important mission. Realizing this brought them a measure of relief. Although they still clung to the hope of survival, they knew their real purpose now was likely to serve as bait, cannon fodder to distract the enemy. Exchanging grim nods, the remaining Konoha shinobi scattered into a loose formation, then held their ground, waiting quietly for any arriving Mist Ninja reinforcements. Sure enough, the squad of pursuing Mist Ninjas spotted Nathan's departure and split off a third of their number to circle back toward the warships. The Konoha survivors felt a surge of cautious optimism. Fewer enemies meant a slightly better chance of making it out alive. However slim that chance remained. High above, Nathan glanced once at the retreating Mist Ninjas, but gave them little thought. He beat his wings in powerful strokes, pushing himself to the absolute limit. In an instant, he reached 40 meters per second and shot straight toward the Kirigakure warship. At the same time, on the other side, at the heart of the Kirigakure fleet, aboard its lead warship, Commander Osawa Yuki stared in grim silence as Nathan cut through the sky toward them. His jaw clenched. He had pressed the entire fleet forward, disregarding Omura Ken's sacrifice and the losses that followed, because Yasuda Akiku's urgent message had promised a rare chance to seize the Blackstone stronghold. Now, faced with Nathan's determined advance, Yuki was resolved not to let his quarry slip away so easily. Anger simmered beneath his calm exterior, but he dared not order the fleet to continue under Nathan's watchful eyes. He'd brushed aside the harassment of Konoha squads before. Those small bands lacked the firepower to breach Kirigakure's traditional defenses, but Nathan was different. The ability to fly transformed him into a threat ordinary tactics couldn't contain. Osawa Yuki's posture stiffened. No matter his frustration, he would not move the fleet forward until this new adversary was dealt with. Every weapon, every tactic, would have to be deployed to keep Nathan from reaching the stronghold. Captain Osawa Yuki turned to the young mist ninja at his side and commanded, "Mizuki, relay the order. All units halt immediately." "Yes, Captain," Sakurai Mizuki replied. From her ninja pouch she withdrew a slender flute and raised it to her lips. A soft melody drifted out, carried on chakra currents that swept across the armada. To Nathan it sounded like a simple tune, but every mist scion who knew their codes recognized it as Yuki's command. At once the mist-clad ships slowed their course and drifted toward one another, awaiting further orders. A wry smile tugged at Nathan's lips. With the enemy fleet in disarray, this was his chance to strike before they could regroup. He dipped his altitude, claws extended, ready to descend on the nearest vessel, when a shrill flute note suddenly pierced the air. Nathan's head spun. He faltered in midair, nearly tumbling from the sky. Only his iron will prevented a fall. Clenching his jaw, he forced his senses back under control and dispelled the intrusive melody. Steadying himself, Nathan pulled upward, eyes blazing with renewed determination. The trap had been sprung, but he wasn't about to become prey. Nathan nimbly dodged the kunai and shuriken hurled at him by the mist ninjas below. Watching from above, Sakurai Mizuki's brow twitched with frustration, while her companion, Osawa Yuki, remained impassive. Mizuki was undeniably talented. She had mastered advanced soundwave ninjutsu and powerful illusion techniques, but this was hardly her first attempt to stop Nathan. Just a few missions ago, when the Anbu laid out their 4-mist seal formation on Yingzui Cliff, they dispatched senior ninja Mizuguchi Hideo to overwhelm him with a barrage of sound-based mirages. Yet Nathan had shattered Hideo's illusions without so much as pausing. Yuki wasn't surprised that Nathan had slipped free of Mizuki's trickery so quickly. Mizuki's skills, impressive though they were, did not surpass those of Hideo. That said, her presence here was far from pointless. Knowing that Sakurai Mizuki was watching kept Nathan from growing overconfident. And in a battle such as this, even the slightest hesitation could tip the scales. Chapter 462, Destruction and Delay. Nathan hovered just beyond striking distance, the memory of his last misstep still fresh. He dared not drop altitude and dive straight into the Kirigakure fleet's center, at least, not yet. Still, he hadn't given up. His gaze locked on the female shinobi flanking Lady Osawa Yuki aboard the flagship. With a powerful thrust of his wings, he banked around to the fleet's rear. Since Yuki's order had only just been issued, the warships were still maneuvering into formation and remained several meters apart. That gap was all Nathan needed. From this angle, even if the enemy tried to unleash the same soundwave illusion she'd used before, he could easily resist it. He dived again, aiming for the last warship in the line. But before he could strike, a volley of dense wind bombs streaked toward him. He recognized their telltale shimmering tails, advanced chakra constructs designed for one purpose, to keep him at bay. Scanning the deck below, Nathan counted 3 Kirigakure shinobi. 2 radiated the hardened aura of special jonin, while the third stood out as a true jonin. It was that senior ninja who had just activated the wind escape technique, scattering those bombs through the air, and now it was his next move that would decide whether Nathan could break their formation or be forced to retreat once more. Nathan beat his wings, twisting in midair to dodge the incoming wind bombs. Almost at once, 2 elite jonin joined the attack. One unleashed a water escape technique, an icy torrent that shot from his mouth, aiming straight for Nathan's heart, while the other rained shuriken down to cut off every avenue of retreat. At the same time, several mist shinobi surged forward, pelting him with kunai and more shuriken. Not long ago, Nathan would have been hard-pressed just to weather such a barrage. True, his constitution had recently climbed to 19 points, bolstering his defenses and accelerating his healing, and his level 8 palm fairy technique lent him strength few ordinary shinobi could match. But even so, a mortal body has its limits, and this onslaught threatened to overwhelm them. In that critical moment, everything changed. Nathan's eyes flashed with resolve as he tracked each missile of wind, water, and steel. He flapped his wings again, evading a spinning gust and a brutal jet of water that struck his chest. As he drifted into clearer air, his fingers wove a rapid hand seal. A low incantation slipped past his lips, and the earth beneath him responded. Earth style, hardening technique. Suddenly, the ground at his feet surged up, wrapping him in a shell of tempered rock. As the rock hardened, it absorbed the force of the next volley of shuriken and kunai, sparing Nathan from what should have been mortal wounds. Encased in earthen armor, he hovered above the fray, ready to transform defense into counterattack. Nathan's skin suddenly shifted to a mottled gray-black, as if polished stone, and he felt his defenses surge. No longer did he flinch from the kunai and shuriken hurled at him. The blades merely thudded against his hardened flesh, drawing only the faintest sting. With the physical threats now harmless, his burden lightened, and he seized his chance. The mist shinobi, still reeling from his transformation, scarcely had time to react as Nathan closed in on the hidden mist vessel. Gathering chakra, he unleashed the fire style, great dragonfire technique. 3 colossal serpentine dragons of flame erupted around him, twisting skyward before splitting off in 3 directions. The first dragon dove onto the ship's deck, ravenous jaws snapping at the startled mist ninjas. The remaining 2 dragons hurtled toward the hull, tongues of fire licking at the wooden sides. Spotting the attack, a lone mist ninja countered with ninjutsu of his own, water style, water dragon bullet technique, and summoned a gigantic water dragon to meet one of the fiery beasts. The 2 forces collided in a deafening roar, scalding steam enveloping the deck. But Nathan's technique was too powerful. Though the Tur dragon held for a moment, the fiery serpent finally tore through, crashing into the warship's flank. Splinters flew as the hull cracked under the impact, and fire spread across the deck. The mist ninjas scrambled. Their defenses were already crumbling under Nathan's relentless assault. Nathan's fire jutsu tore through the night. In an instant, a massive blast ripped a gaping hole in the mist ninja warship's hull, and roaring flames swept across the deck. The surprised mist ninjas scrambled over the rails and dove into the sea to save themselves. Circling the vessel, Nathan searched for the perfect opening. Then, in rapid succession, he unleashed 2 more fire-style techniques, Great Dragon Flame and Great Fireball. First, 3 serpentine dragons of flame spiraled into being. Then a colossal fireball rose behind them. They crashed into the ship's side, turning the fire below into a raging inferno. The attack didn't claim many lives, but it achieved its goal. Nathan had destroyed an enemy warship. Satisfied, he climbed higher into the sky and paused to survey the chaos. The blazing wreck, the tossing sea, and the scattered mist ninja survivors paddling desperately for shore. Only now did his skin revert to its usual pale tone. The first combat use of his earth style, hardening technique, had worked flawlessly. Clearly, the Mist Village's fleet defenses were strong, but Nathan had proven they were not invincible. Evidence of their failure was plain to see. 3 Mist hidden ninjas had sprung up out of nowhere, and Sano Nobuhisa's raiding party lay shattered, many dead or wounded, while the fleet remained virtually unscathed. Their real stroke of bad luck, however, was running straight into Nathan, an unpredictable master who not only weathered their assault but smashed their vessels to splinters. In retrospect, Nathan could only chalk it up to misfortune on their part. Had he not taken a sudden interest and intervened, they might have reached the outskirts of the Blackstone stronghold first and struck the opening blow. But the world doesn't allow what-ifs. Once he chose to act, any other outcome was impossible. With that thought, Nathan moved on at full tilt. In mere breaths, he darted to the opposite end of the fleet, where the lead mist-hidden ship hovered. He had planned to use the chaos to catch them off guard, only to discover that the enemy seemed to have anticipated his every move. Nathan watched as 3 Jonin disembarked from the nearest ship, flanked by 2 more who had been quietly transferred from the 2 Mist Guard vessels in the rear. In total, 5 Jonin now stood arrayed on a single Kirigakure warship. Individually, most possessed only a single specialty technique, but even so, none were to be underestimated. What troubled him most was that his earth escape, hardening technique was already known to them. He could no longer hope for the element of surprise. Pressing forward under these circumstances would be reckless. He shifted his gaze to the central warship, anchored between bow and stern, where Kirigakure Shinobi crouched along the deck, alert and tense. A few had even slipped off the ship to set up perimeter guards, eyes trained on Nathan's boat as they waited for his next move. On the flanks, Jonin on the other vessels mirrored their vigilance, ready to lend support at a moment's notice. Faced with such overwhelming watchfulness, Nathan forced himself to remain still. He knew neither side would make the first move. Kirigakure dared not provoke him, and he could not afford a misstep. The standoff held them all in a silent freeze, ships creaking on the dark water as each waited for the other to strike. Nathan hovered high above the Kirigakure warships, his gaze tracking each vessel as they drifted closer together. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Once the ships linked up and their ninja crews fell into tight formations, they'd be able to cover one another, and any chance of taking them by surprise would vanish. With that in mind, Nathan dove, descending in a swift arc until he hovered just out of reach of the deckhands' weapons. Below, the mist ninjas froze mid-motion, eyes widening. Those on the nearest ship and the sentries scattered around it tensed, every taut muscle straining as if their hearts were lodged in their throats. But Nathan made no direct assault. He leveled off at the precise altitude they couldn't touch, then exhaled. A thick plume of white mist poured from him, billowing outward like a living wave. In the blink of an eye, it engulfed the decks and water in a sphere dozens of meters wide, and it didn't stop there. The vapor continued to swell, creeping forward relentlessly, swallowing wood and steel alike in its ghostly embrace. This was only the beginning. For several breaths, scattered teams of mist shinobi launched jutsu, wind escape, and fire escape, trying in vain to blow the white cloud away. At best, they slowed its advance briefly before the haze swallowed them whole. A dozen heartbeats later, eyes turned skyward to discover the entire hidden mist fleet had vanished. In its place hovered a vast sphere of fog, soft and billowy like cotton candy, spanning nearly 200 meters in every direction. This was no ordinary mist, but chakra-charged vapor born of Nathan's water release, hidden mist technique. Nathan hadn't created it to shroud the fleet's position. He wanted to keep the ships separated. Any sailor knows that dense fog at sea, beyond the ever-present threat of reefs, can be deadly, disorienting crews and risking collisions. Even shinobi, superior to ordinary mariners, aren't immune to those dangers. The white mist Nathan summoned was far from ordinary. It thrummed with chakra powerful enough to scramble even a seasoned ninja's senses. But Nathan didn't intend to annihilate his foes. He only needed to stall them. By maintaining the mist, he could force them into a defensive posture long enough to launch targeted strikes and keep the pressure on. From that moment on, everything unfolded exactly as Nathan had planned. Chapter 463, Scoring Twice. A thick white mist enveloped the fleet. Captain Yuki Osawa stood on the deck, peering into the blank haze. He withdrew his spiritual senses. Each felt dulled and distorted by the fog, then without a second thought, ordered every ship to advance with the utmost caution. Moments later, just as Yuki was weighing their options, a thunderous bang echoed from the rear ranks. "A detonating talisman?" he barked. Lieutenant Yushu Osawa's eyes snapped wide. Of course Nathan was behind it. He'd suspected as much the instant the shockwave rippled through their formation. It unnerved him. Until now, it had been their water-release Kirigakure technique that held enemies at bay. Only when the tables turned did they realize how desperate it felt to be on the receiving end. Then Yushu's expression shifted. If they couldn't punch through Nathan's blockade, why not pour fuel on the fire? A sly grin crept across his face as a bold new plan formed in his mind. Osawa Yuki barely registered the mounting clash of steel and shouts behind him. He turned to Sakurai Mitsuki and said, "Mitsuki, alert every ship's captain. Have them muster their crews and execute the Kirigakure no Jutsu, the hidden mist technique." Mitsuki blinked in surprise. "The hidden mist technique?" Yuki's eyes were steely. "Yes, at once." She nodded, and without hesitation, formed the seals for her secret voice transmission jutsu. Words of command streamed through her chakra to the leading jonin aboard each vessel. The interference of Nathan's vast chakra made the transmission waver, and Mitsuki's face drained of color as she struggled to maintain clarity. But she succeeded, and the fleet's captains now knew exactly what to do. No sooner had the last syllable faded than Nathan, formerly known as Ching Ming, paused mid-assault on a Kirigakure warship at the rear of the formation. Kunai streaked toward him from every side. With a powerful beat of his wings, he banked sharply and soared upward, lifting himself beyond the enemy's reach. From his new vantage point, he prepared for the next strike. Nathan hovered in midair, eyes closed, as he sent tendrils of chakra threading through the swirling white mist. He strained to detect any movement. A few heartbeats later, he opened his eyes and murmured, "Just as I thought, there's foreign chakra here." Moments ago, he'd felt an unfamiliar energy pulse outward, warping his senses and thickening the fog around him. Now, with careful concentration, he confirmed his suspicion. Someone was weaving the water release mist hidden technique, and they weren't alone. As he probed, 3 more shinobi tapped into the same jutsu, their chakra signatures flaring one after another. Already, the mist was growing denser, so fast that the daylight outside barely pierced the haze. Nathan allowed himself a wry smile. The speed of their response spoke volumes about their masterful command of the fog-hidden jutsu. He'd expected nothing less from the Mist Village's best. He landed silently. Through the veil of white, he could just make out the silhouettes of the enemy ninja, each preparing to strike. They were using the very nature of the mist-hidden technique to overwhelm his own chakra threads, diluting his sensory reach and preventing him from launching, let alone controlling, any counterattack. Nathan drew a steady breath. Their strategy was clear. Smother his advantage in the fog, then swarm him. But he wasn't so easily corralled. As the mist pulsed and writhed around him, he tightened his grip on the hilt of his kunai, ready to turn their tactic against them. Nathan considered the risk. The Kirigakure ninja, acclimated to the fog-shrouded terrain and versed in its jutsu, could seize any opening to strike back. Yet such a countermove wouldn't come instantly, and in the meantime, he could cripple another warship. With that thought, he refocused his gaze downward through the swirling white mist and spotted the still panicked crew on the deck below. Moments ago, he'd struck them unawares. Now he saw the perfect chance to press his advantage. Without hesitation, Nathan formed a series of hand seals and unleashed his ninjutsu, wind release, great breakthrough. Hundreds of chakra points flared within him as he exhaled a concentrated hurricane, slicing cleanly through the fog. On the Kirigakure battleship, the Mist Ninja team, stunned by Nathan's sudden disappearance, watched in disbelief as the haze cleared. Relief and elation rippled across their faces. They were certain their jonin had shattered Nathan's blockade and come to their aid. Osawa Yuki's orders had just reached the lead jonin aboard each warship, leaving the mid-level genin scrambling to understand the plan. Seizing the momentary confusion, Nathan unfurled the massive wings on his back and rocketed toward the Kirigakure vessel at breakneck speed. On deck, 2 Kirigakure jonin caught sight of him. Their expressions went pale. "Everyone, fire at will!" they roared, hurling kunai and unleashing roaring torrents of flame. Nathan was already too close. With a flash of chakra, he activated Earth Release, hardening technique. His skin turned as tough as iron, and the incoming kunai flattened harmlessly against him. He then beat his wings, veering cleanly out of the path of the fiery jutsu. Now hovering mere meters from the ship's rail, he wasted no time. His hands moved in a blur as he formed the requisite seals. "Wind release, wind blade," he shouted. In an instant, a colossal arc of razor-sharp wind, nearly 10 meters wide, manifested before him. The blade whistled through the air and slammed into the Kirigakure warship, ripping through wood and rigging with thunderous force. 2 Kirigakure jonin leaped forward to intercept him, but the wind blade came too swiftly, and from exactly the angle Nathan had chosen, leaving them no time to form a single hand seal. They could only stare in disbelief as the razor-sharp gust sliced into the hull of the mist-hidden ship. Crack, wood splintered and groaned as a jagged rupture yawned just below the waterline. In an instant, icy seawater gushed into the hold, sending crewmen scrambling. "Quick, plug the breach!" cried several mist shinobi, tearing at tar and cloth to stuff the wound. Nathan stood unmoved. The moment the wind blade shattered the planks, he wove new seals and intoned the ninjutsu. Fire style, great dragon fire technique. A torrential blast of flame erupted from his mouth, curling into 3 roaring fire dragons that twisted in the smoky air. At his command, one fiery serpent dove toward the frantic shinobi, trying to stem the flood, its scorching maw closing in on them. The other 2 dragons arced overhead, then dove back down, belching torrents of searing flame against the weakened sides of the vessel, driving the mist ship one step closer to ruin. Nathan's eyes narrowed as 3 fiery dragons tore across the deck of the Kirigakure warship. Instantly, the 2 mist-hidden ship senior shinobi leapt into action, their kunai cutting swirls through the smoke as they intercepted the first 2 beasts. Despite their skill, they found themselves powerless against the 3rd dragon. With a desperate coordination, they abandoned the breach in the hull and focused entirely on fending off the oncoming fire wyverns. Their combined might nearly overwhelmed the dragons, but the struggle cost them dearly. Blades and shurikens flew in every direction, and each deflected flame drove seawater cascading through the wounded hull. The extra water sloshed against the timbers, sending the vessel tipping under the weight. Seizing the moment, Nathan slipped around to the ship's opposite side. He drew in a deep breath, channeling chakra through his lungs and throat, and unleashed his signature jutsu, fire style, great dragonfire technique. 3 colossal dragons of flame burst forth in a single roar, their inferno lighting the night sky. This time only 1 dragon was halted by the exhausted senior shinobi. The remaining 2 plowed into the warship's deck, igniting sails, rigging, and wood alike. In moments, flames licked every corner of the vessel, turning it into a floating blaze. Smoke and heat drove the crew back, forcing the 2 Kirigakure jonin to issue a single grim command: abandon ship. Barely a few heartbeats later, the white mist that Nathan had once dispelled began to swirl back around him. Thick tendrils of fog snaked across the deck, blotting out the chaos. His chakra flared in response, but he needed no further attack. From his vantage point, amid the encroaching mist, he watched the warship's inferno glow against the dark sea, a silent testament to his power. Then, unnoticed by friend or foe, Nathan vanished into the reforming haze. Nathan watched the Kirigakure warship shudder as his wind blade sliced through its sails, then succumb to the twin fire dragons he unleashed moments later. The deck exploded in flame and splintered timber. Survival was impossible. There was no point in pressing his luck or striking at the remaining enemy vessels. 2 warships sunk would be more than enough to stall their advance. Drawing a steady breath, Nathan folded his hands and ignited the water style, mist concealment. A veil of silvery fog billowed around the burning hulk, swallowing its panic-stricken survivors and cloaking the surrounding sea in an impenetrable haze. Trapped within that mist, the remainder of the Kirigakure fleet would be forced to slow their retreat, just long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Satisfied, Nathan held the technique in place, confident that his intervention had bought his allies the precious time they needed. Chapter 464, Departure and the Unexpected Surprise. Phew, a Kirigakure warship burst out of the white mist as though plowing through marshmallows. Then came a second, then a third. Before long, every Kirigakure vessel had pierced beyond the boundary of Nathan's water release, Kirigakure style. Nearly half an hour had passed since he'd first unleashed the technique overhead. Suspended in midair, Nathan fluttered his wings weakly, his face drawn and ashen, like someone recovering from a grave illness. There was only one explanation. He was running on empty. For the past 30 minutes, he'd poured every ounce of chakra into maintaining the water release, Kirigakure style, even as the mist shinobi below fought back with equal determination. A handful of jonin and dozens of junior genin combined their chakra to contest his control of the battlefield. No matter how vast Nathan's reserves might be against such overwhelming numbers, he was beginning to falter. Nathan still had to tweak the white mist's boundaries constantly to keep the mist ninja from slipping free. Lately, Osawayuki had dispatched a squad of those ninja to undermine Nathan's control, while secretly seizing Kirigakure warships in an attempt to sail beyond the mist. That threat forced Nathan into non-stop vigilance. Only his extraordinary chakra reserves had sustained him this long. Anyone else would have been drained long ago. Even so, he was nearing his limit. Though his chakra was regenerating quickly, he was nowhere near his peak, and in that weakened state, he couldn't hope to halt Kirigakure's full advance. He cast a careful glance across the crowded fleet of Kirigakure warships. Destroying those 2 flagships first was definitely the right call, he muttered under his breath. Desperate to capture the Blackstone stronghold, Kirigakure had thrown every elite soldier into this assault. Leaving aside Yasuda Chuju for now, nearly every vessel in their armada teemed with troops, proof that the final showdown was about to begin. Nathan had sunk 2 of their ships, forcing the rest to crowd together and slowing the Mist Ninja's advance. His half-hour delay had been just enough for Sano Nobuhisa and his men to reach the Blackstone stronghold first. There was no longer any need for Nathan to stall Kirigakure's forces. He cast one last look at the distant sea. Every Konoha shinobi who'd survived the crossing because of him was now dead. His promise of hope felt as illusory as a flower in a mirror or the moon's reflection on water. True power belonged only to those who were strong. Everything else was but a fleeting dream. With a quiet sigh, Nathan tore his gaze away, shook his head free of regrets, and flapped his wings toward the Blackstone stronghold. Below him, a squad of mist ninjas watched their captain depart, their faces a tangle of admiration and uncertainty. "Captain," Sakurai Mitsuki asked softly beside Osawa Yuki, "do we press on?" Now that Nathan has withdrawn, it's obvious what his objective was all along, to buy time. In other words, Konoha must be fully prepared by now. Even if we push on, we'll no longer find the Blackstone fortress undefended. And a frontal assault? After that clash 2 days ago, if Konoha digs in, any attack we mount will almost certainly fail. To make matters worse, the allied units we met along the way were ambushed, took heavy losses, and can offer us almost no support. Under these circumstances, fulfilling our mission seems all but impossible. Do we really need to keep advancing? That question echoed not only in Mitsuki Sakurai's mind, but in the thoughts of many other Kirigakure shinobi. When Mitsuki finally voiced her doubts, she received a single, unhesitating reply from Commander Osawa Yuki. "Continue." "Of course we press on," Osawa Yuki declared, turning to Sakurai Mitsuki. "Immediately order every Jonin unit to muster their forces and advance at top speed." But," Mitsuki stammered, surprise and hesitation flickering across her face. She opened her mouth to protest, then met Yuki's steely gaze and shut it, just as quickly. Unlike Konoha, Kirigakure under the iron rule of the 3rd Mizukage tolerates no debate. When an order comes down, even seasoned Jonin have no choice but to obey. Swallowing her objections, Mitsuki wove the required hand seals and transmitted Yuki's command to each fleet's lead Jonin. In moments, the entire Kirigakure armada sprang into action. From the deck of the flagship, Yuki watched the warships arrayed before and behind him, the sea stretching out like an ocean of possibility. A knot of unease tightened in his chest. 3 reasons drove him to order the advance, and the first was that he simply refused to let this moment slip away. Deep down, he still clung to hope. Nathan scanned the distant skyline, praying Konoha wouldn't react too swiftly and ruin their chance. At the same time, Yasuda Kyuju's squad was racing toward the Blackstone stronghold. If they pulled back now, they would be walking straight into an encirclement. How many of them would survive such a trap would be pure luck, and Osawa Yuki refused to gamble with his men's lives. This was his 3rd directive, and it came straight from the village elders. Few outsiders understood the full picture, but Osawa knew their operation at the gap in Konoha's southern defenses was faltering. In the past 2 days, they'd claimed swaths of territory, but Konoha's counterattacks grew fiercer by the hour. Intercepted intelligence even hinted that Konoha was mustering fresh forces to strike back. The elders would not tolerate any further setbacks, nor could they afford Konoha reinforcements slipping through elsewhere. That was why Osawa's decoy teams, whether or not they could capture their assigned stronghold, had orders to keep Konoha's ninjas fully occupied. There would be no pause, no regrouping, no second chances. Less than 48 hours after the initial fight began, Osawa Yuki had already ordered his next assault, every second of delay costing them the fragile advantage they still held. Osawa Yuki let out a soft sigh. Ever since he'd learned that Yasuda Chuju's squad had been ambushed, his grand plan to storm Konoha's Blackstone Fortress and win himself a glorious victory had unraveled. Now all he could do was proceed cautiously, one step at a time. Such a shame, he muttered under his breath. Meanwhile, several kilometers away, Nathan soared through the sky on his wind wings technique. Just as he was about to push on, a sudden tremor ran through his body, and an idea sparked in his mind. What's that? He hovered in midair, stunned for a heartbeat, then a broad grin split his face. Nathan descended swiftly, landing lightly on the ocean's surface. Standing with water lapping at his boots, he closed his eyes and focused inward, trying to recapture the inspiration that had just struck him. Moments later, he opened his eyes and whispered, "Skill panel." A thought later, the translucent interface materialized before him. There it was. Wind Release, Wind Wings had quietly climbed from level 4 to level 5. During his flight just now, Nathan's mastery had finally accumulated enough experience to break through to the next tier. He flexed his wings, eager to test their new power. Nathan's mind brimmed with the crucial insights of a level 5 wind escape technique, Wind Release, Wind Wings. Focusing his chakra, he formed the hand seal and unleashed the ninjutsu. In an instant, a pair of pale cyan wings of swirling energy sprouted from his back. He glanced over his shoulder. Visually, these wings were almost indistinguishable from their level 4 version, but appearance can be deceiving. Nathan gently flexed them, felt the enhanced flow of chakra, then launched himself skyward. He sliced through the air, twisting and banking with a grace and precision he hadn't possessed before. The upgrade to level 5 transformed every facet of the ability. His top speed jumped from 40 meters per second to a breathtaking 100, still below the threshold of supersonic, but astonishingly fast nonetheless. As the wind roared past, Nathan couldn't help but grin to the exhilarating power at his command. 100 meters per second, that's 360 kilometers per hour. Far faster than any car on the road, and in the entire ninja world only 2 techniques can hope to rival him, Namikaze Minato's Flying Thunder God Jutsu and Kumogakure's Tensho Jutsu, Rasa's Gold Dust Release, Onoki's Ultra Heavy Rock Jutsu, Hoshigakure's Peacock Secret Technique, Kirigakure's Foam Technique, Takigakure's Wings of Dawn, all of them fall hopelessly behind. And this is only stage 5 of his wind release, Wind Wings. By stage 6 or 7, his speed will only increase, and with it, his freedom to dominate the skies. Damn it, my weak liver is still holding me back, Nathan muttered, feeling the familiar ache as he pushed himself to maintain that blistering pace. With a final, commanding beat of his wind-forged wings, he vectored toward the Blackstone stronghold, determination propelling him ever onward. Chapter 465, Return. Thanks to his newly enhanced speed, Nathan completed the journey, previously estimated at 20 minutes, in under 10. As he emerged over the Blackstone stronghold's outer wall, he saw Senmuje descending to meet him. Nathan hovered in midair, and rather than landing, activated his mind talk technique to relay everything he'd witnessed at sea. In a clear mental projection, he told Senmuje that the Kirigakure army, burdened by its size, would almost certainly fail to arrive before Lord Sano Nobuhisa's fleet returned. Still, Nathan warned, they mustn't let their guard down. He had no way of knowing whether Yushu Osawa, desperate to seize the initiative, might dispatch a small, chakra-draining raiding party across the waters to strike the stronghold first. Though unlikely, Nathan reminded him the gravest mistake in war was negligence. No threat, however remote, could be ignored. After Nathan's warning, Moriki Tetsuya immediately nodded, his expression grim. "Don't worry, we won't let our guard down." Nathan gave a curt then severed their telepathic link and shot southward toward where Yasuda Akiju's team was advancing. Watching Nathan's silhouette vanish into the distance, Morimu Tetsuichi wasted no time. He dropped down swiftly, ready to deal with any Kirigakure detachment lying in wait. A few miles south of Blackstone Stronghold, Yasuda Akiju's squad ground to a halt as Captain Osawa Yuki's dispatch finally arrived. Yasuda's jaw tightened as he skimmed the report, his face darkened beyond expectation. He had braced for trouble, but this was worse than he'd feared. "Damn Uchiha, Nathan." Yasuda balled up the parchment with a snap. According to Osawa, Nathan's interference had delayed their advance, costing them any hope of arriving at the stronghold first. Now they were left scrambling, and every second wasted could tip the scales against them. Captain Osawa Yuki cut through the chatter. "Forget the joint attack for now," he ordered. "Alter our heading to skirt the Blackstone stronghold. We'll fall back, regroup, and strike together once we've linked up with the others." Lieutenant Yasuda Chuju's jaw tightened. He had already set aside any hope of breaking into the enemy fortress, but he'd clung to that flicker of possibility, enough to drive his troops straight toward those towering walls. Now Osawa's blunt command snuffed out even that hope. For a long moment, Chuju stared at the ground, anger and frustration warring in his eyes. Finally, he exhaled and straightened his shoulders. "Yukio," he said to Yokoyama, Yukio at his side, voice low and taut with fatigue, "notify every unit. Prepare to shift our advance." Yokoyama, mindful of the last debacle, didn't argue. He dropped to one knee, thumbs flying over his comlink as he relayed the new orders. Within minutes, the Kirigakure contingent had gently altered its course. They were still moving toward the Blackstone stronghold, but now they'd loop around it, waiting for the right moment to strike. "If we keep on like this, we'll sail right past the Blackstone stronghold and come out on its eastern flank, near the coast's rear," one of the Kirigakure shinobi muttered. Yamanaka Aoi exchanged puzzled glances with her team as the convoy abruptly altered its course, but with over 2 detachments already under her command, and the swift reinforcements sent by Sano Nobuhisa now at their back, she set aside her doubts and fell in line. Time crept forward. 5 minutes later, Nathan drifted into view above the leading Kirigakure squad. He let out a low chuckle as he observed their new heading. At first, the reason behind their detour eluded him, but in a heartbeat, he pieced together their strategy and the chain of events that had led them here. Shaking his head in mild amusement, he chose not to intervene. After hovering overhead for a few moments, he slipped away, retracing his path until he spotted Yamanaka Aoi and her companions again. From their position, he also pinpointed the location of Sano Nobuhisa's main army, information that would prove invaluable in the battles to come. Nathan had calculated the distances perfectly. At their current pace, he knew Akiku Yasuda's team would reach Blackstone's stronghold before they did, but he was also confident they'd return in time to intercept Yuki Osawa's group. That margin, however narrow, was all they needed. As soon as Aoi Yamanaka relayed the latest updates, she turned to Nathan and pressed for details. "What's the situation inside the stronghold? Have we seen any other enemy detachments arrive?" Nathan didn't hold back. He gave a concise, no-frills report. The defenses were holding, supplies had been secured, and most importantly, his own ambush had stalled Osawa's Mist Ninja squad long enough to keep them from making an early push. Every word was calculated to reassure the listening shinobi. True to form, as soon as Nathan mentioned that his surprise attack would almost certainly prevent the second enemy team from reaching the stronghold first, tension across the comms line visibly eased. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the other side. After swapping a few more tactical details, Nathan bid the group farewell. With his part done, he angled his flight toward the great host assembled under Commander Nobuhisa Sano. He'd amassed a report worthy of the stronghold's top commander, and he intended to deliver every last fact in person. Personal glory aside, Nathan knew that clear intelligence was vital. If any commander acted on bad information, they risked making a catastrophic decision, one Nathan would then have to clean up, and he had no interest in wasting time like that. More importantly, he needed a secure place to restore his chakra, and there were few safer spots than alongside the main army. Thanks to precise reconnaissance and the swift speed granted by his level 5 wind release, Wind Wings, Nathan swiftly picked up the army's trail. He contacted Lieutenant Sano Nobuhisa, shared his findings, and citing dangerously low chakra, slipped quietly into the troop column. 30 minutes passed in relative calm before Nathan and the others returned to the Blackstone base. His earlier worry that Osawa Yuki might have sent a raiding party proved unfounded. The base was exactly as they had left it. Now, bolstered by the main army's presence, Commander Mori Mutsuichi and his garrison could finally breathe easier. As for Akiku Yasuda and her team, Aoi Yamanaka's latest report places them just east of the Blackstone base, along the coastline, waiting for Yuki Ozawa's arrival. When Nobuhisa Sano heard this, he considered seizing the moment to surround and eliminate these mist shinobi or driving them off entirely. In the end, though, he decided against any rash assault. After the massive battle they just fought and the grueling march that followed, most of the Konoha warriors were completely spent. Launching an all-out attack now would be far too risky. What's more, Yuki Ozawa's fleet was due to arrive any minute, so there simply wasn't time to organize a decisive strike. It was far better to let the troops rest, recover their strength, and prepare for the battles still to come. Chapter 466, The Doomed Ending. An hour later, dusk had settled over the western horizon. The sun's afterglow painted the sea in broad swathes of gold, and through that radiant expanse a large warship slowly materialized. 4 mist-like crests adorned its hull, clear emblems of Hidden Mist Village. This was one of the Kirigakure vessels under Osawa Yuki's command. Shortly afterward, 3 more ships slipped into view, delayed only by brief rest stops along the way. Clearly, their captains intended to strike without hesitation. Because Yasuda Chuju and her forces held the coastline, Sano Nobuhisa had stationed his defenses barely a kilometer from the fortress, hoping to intercept any invaders before they reached shore. But the barrier proved no obstacle. Osawa Yuki's fleet landed unimpeded and linked up with Yasuda Chuju's men almost at once. Without pausing to draw breath, they surged forward, and in an instant the clash was upon them. The air filled with the roar of battle, steel rang against steel, and the fate of the fortress hung in the balance. This time, neither side was hiding tricks. It was a straightforward clash, attack versus defense, a pure test of overall combat effectiveness. Atop one of Blackstone Stronghold's tallest towers in Nanchang, Nathan stood watch, his gaze fixed on the eastern battlefield. The front lines lay some distance away, but his Sharingan insight let him read the flow of battle as if he were there. After a few minutes of observation, he nodded to himself. Despite fielding fewer troops than he had 2 days ago, the Stronghold's defenders were in a stronger position now. Without Nathan's presence, the 2 forces would never have reached such an even footing. Konoha had just claimed a hard-won victory. The soldiers had rested before the next engagement, and morale was soaring. They could finally perform at peak strength. As for the Mist Shinobi, Osawa Yuki and Yasuda Akiku had managed to suppress news and limit their sides' coordination time, but no one was fooled. Short though their communications were, both camps already understood exactly what they faced. Even without a word from Osawa Yuki or Yasuda Chuju, Nathan could see exactly what they were thinking. This operation was headed for disaster. Ninjas are, after all, ordinary people. The moment a single shinobi hesitates, their effectiveness in battle drops. 1 or 2 faltering fighters might not tip the scales, but when more than half a squad is holding back, the team's overall power plummets. How could they possibly win under those conditions? Nathan's verdict was grim. Kirigakure was bound to be crushed. The only thing that could change the outcome would be the sudden appearance of a Kage-level warrior, someone on the order of Namikaze Minato, capable of facing 10 or even 100 opponents alone. But there was no Minato here, nor any other ninja of that caliber. Rumors of the 3rd and 4th Mizukage's extraordinary might, the likes of Yagura, meant nothing if they couldn't join the fight. Isolated in enemy lands, Kirigakure's true strength was disappointingly average. Right now, Kirigakure was simply exploiting Konoha's divided attention, striking while the Leaf Village battled multiple foes in a bid to cross into the Fire Country. Yet even that gambit felt doomed to fail unless reinforcements arrived. Nathan knew it. Without a miraculous intervention, defeat was all but certain. Nathan stared out at the distant horizon and frowned. With their strength, the Tsunagakure forces couldn't have bypassed Konoha's forward base, built deep in the southeast of the Land of Waves, without engaging it first. Their vast army should have clashed there long before this decisive battle with Konoha ever began. Shaking off the thought, he stepped onto the rooftop, formed a series of crisp hand seals, and unleashed his jutsu, Wind Release. Wind Wings. A pair of pale cyan chakra wings burst from his back. Nathan flexed them once and lifted effortlessly into the night sky. He angled his course straight for the battlefield, cutting through the air at an astonishing clip. He'd already seen enough to know how this fight would end. Yet without his help, Konoha's shinobi would pay dearly to repel Tsunagakure's assault, and Nathan didn't mind tipping the scales in their favor. High above the fray, he closed his eyes and took stock of his chakra reserves. After an hour of steady recovery, he had just under 30,000 chakra points. That was more than most shinobi. Many jonin would envy that level, but to Nathan it still felt dangerously low. He'd need every bit of it before this night was through. Nathan decided to use the chaos of the ongoing skirmish to replenish his chakra. Gathering speed, he shot forward and within seconds hovered above the battlefield. Without giving the Kirigakure Chunin below a moment's warning, he zeroed in on one target and dove. Why a Chunin? It was simple. Genin lack the chakra, stamina, and mental resilience to make the effort worthwhile, and Junin are far too powerful to subdue quickly. Chunin, by contrast, strike the perfect balance. The unsuspecting ninja hadn't even noticed Nathan's approach. The instant their eyes met, Nathan unleashed his Genjutsu Sharingan, yanking the Chunin's consciousness into a nightmarish illusion. He wasted no time, propelling himself forward, weaving hand seals in midair, and slammed a firm grip around the enemy's throat. Nathan's palm flared as he unleashed the chakra absorption technique. Instantly, the Mist Village shinobi before him screamed, his chakra gushing out like a burst dam. Nathan's own meridians filtered and refined the stolen energy, converting it into his personal reserves. In a heartbeat, every last drop was drawn out. Yet Nathan wasn't satisfied. He held the technique in place, forcibly pulling spiritual and physical energy from his fallen opponent's body, transforming it into chakra and absorbing it as well. Within seconds, the kunoichi went completely limp, her life extinguished. Lowering his hand, Nathan felt the sudden swell of power within him. His chakra pool had just grown by over 10,000 points. He allowed himself a small nod of approval. Before he could steady himself, two sharp whooshes cut through the air. Nathan's ears pricked, and he shifted his weight at once. Two kunai whistled past his shoulder and embedded themselves in the earth just feet away. He turned toward the projectile's origin and found himself staring at two Kirigakure Genin, their eyes locked on him with equal measures of awe and wariness. It was obvious the ambush had come from these two. Nathan's eyes narrowed, and in the next instant, he vanished in a blur of motion, his flash body technique in full effect. Two sharp cries split the air. As the startled Kirigakure Genin whirled to face him, Nathan reappeared behind them, landing a crushing punch and follow-up kick that sent both sprawling. Blood spurted from their mouths, a testament to the raw power behind his strikes. Without hesitation, Nathan activated his Sharingan Genjutsu, seizing control of their minds. His fingers wove a quick hand seal, and he unleashed the chakra absorption technique. In barely more than a heartbeat, he closed his grip around them and began to siphon their chakra. When their reserves ran out, he turned to draining every last scrap of their physical and mental energy, tightening his hold until they lay utterly spent. They might have been Chunin, but having attacked him first, they'd forfeited any right to mercy. Chapter 467, Training Partner. Another 10,000 chakra points. Pretty good, Nathan muttered to himself, releasing his grip and closing his eyes to gauge the surge of energy pulsing through his veins. No sooner had he finished than two sharp cracks rang out. He opened his eyes to see the two Kirigakure Genin before him collapse with heavy thuds, motionless on the ground. Nathan spared them only a passing glance and shifted his focus to the next opponent. Across the clearing, a Kirigakure Chunin was locked in combat with one of Konohagakure's own. Steel rang against steel as their blades met in a dance of parries and thrusts. Spotting his moment, Nathan drew the long sword from his waist. A faint green glow traced its length as he funneled his chakra into the instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he vanished from view. He reappeared beside the Kirigakure Chunin and attacked without hesitation, the long sword arcing toward the unsuspecting shinobi. But the Chunin had seen Nathan's cold efficiency, 3 victims in rapid succession, and was ready. At the last possible second, he dropped his body low, letting the blade whistle just overhead. Rolling forward in one fluid motion, he sprang back up, creating distance between them and turning Nathan's surprise into a momentary stalemate. Nathan shook his head. It won't work. He closed the distance in one swift step his long sword arcing toward the ninja from the hidden mist. Startled by the lingering afterimage of Nathan's Sharingan, the shinobi never saw the blade's angle until it was too late. With no room to evade, he thrust his kunai upward in a desperate block. Clang! Metal rang out as Nathan's sword met the kunai, driving the ninja back half a step and shattering his momentum. Seizing the advantage, Nathan deftly sheathed his short blade and vanished from sight, only to reappear at his opponent's flank in an instant. A ghostly whoosh heralded the next strike as Nathan swung the long sword in a lethal arc. The ninja, now keenly aware of the murderous intent behind those movements, stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding the blade's edge. But Nathan didn't relent. He flowed around his adversary's defense once more, materializing on the other side and bringing his sword down again with unerring precision. Nathan's blade came down again, and a surge of panic washed over Yoko Ono. She tried to evade, but there was no opening. She had to raise her sword in defense. Nathan's strikes bore immense force and fell at deceptive angles, preventing her from committing her full strength. With each heavy clang of steel on steel, she was driven backward, inch by inch, unable to regain the initiative. Clang, clang, clang. Nathan circled her relentlessly, his assault unyielding. After a few breathless moments, Yoko's defenses began to crumble. As she lifted her guard, Nathan's next swing bit cruelly into her arm, severing it halfway through with a single, merciless cut. "Ah!" Yoko cried, crumpling to one knee. Nathan paid no heed to her scream. Seizing the instant when pain stiffened her muscles, he closed the distance in a blur. With a flourish of his sword, he unleashed the flash sword technique, then immediately ensnared her with the magic shackle technique. In an instant, Yoko found herself frozen, as though driven to the ground by colossal iron spikes. Agony radiated from her injured limb, each heartbeat a fresh wave of torment. Nathan paid no heed to the pain in Ono Yoko's eyes. He raised his right hand, formed a precise seal, and activated the chakra absorption technique. The moment his palm pressed against her chest, an almost violent vacuum ripped through her chakra reserves, drawing them out like water rushing from a broken dam. At first, Yoko clung to her composure, but once her chakra was gone, Nathan's spell began siphoning her physical stamina and spiritual energy, the two vital forces that sustain life itself. Panic overtook her as she realized what was happening. Without those energies, survival was impossible. "No!" she screamed, summoning the last of her strength to shatter the bonds of the magic shackle technique. For a brief instant, she was free, but it proved futile. When Nathan withdrew his hand, Yoko's body went limp, and she collapsed to the ground, breathless. Nathan gave her no further thought. His gaze already swept the battlefield, locking onto the next Kirigakure Chunin. Even this Kirigakure Chunin reacted with lightning speed, but against Nathan's overwhelming power, no trick could succeed. In just a dozen breaths, Nathan spotted an opening and seized control of his opponent's chakra using the familiar chakra absorption technique. Within seconds, he had drained not only the Chunin's chakra, but also his mental and physical reserves. At last, Nathan's own chakra pool climbed back above 80,000 points, a level not easily reached a second time. Not far away, two Kirigakure Jonin had already closed the distance, clearly dispatched to deal with him. Nathan wasn't surprised. He knew that a shinobi of his reputation would draw every available enemy. That urgency was precisely why he had struck so quickly and decisively to finish the Chunin before reinforcements could arrive. Now that his chakra had been replenished, he no longer needed to worry about being targeted. In fact, he welcomed it. As for why, the reason was simple. Nathan's mastery of the instant sword technique had skyrocketed after the Valley battle. His skill gauge now read level 6, 8,450's 10,000, just 1,550 points shy of the flawless level 7. A couple of sparring partners would be perfect for stamping out the last of his weak points. Confident he could handle whatever the Kirigakure shinobi threw at him, he sheathed hesitation along with the rest of his doubts. With that, Nathan drew the long sword from his waist. A ripple of green light shimmered across his body as he activated the instant sword technique, propelling himself toward the two Jonin waiting in the distance. The pair of mist-hidden elders exchanged a quick glance. Instead of retreating, they simply slid back a step and then roared forward like charging bulls. Just as they closed in, each hurled a razor-sharp kunai aimed squarely at Nathan's throat and chest. Awareness flickered through the three magatama swirling in Nathan's pupils. They spun into action, guiding his focus to both airborne blades. He twisted aside to avoid the first kunai's deadly arc, then brought his long sword down in a blur, barking steel against metal, to cleave the second kunai in two. Yet the jonin had set a trap. No sooner had Nathan's blade shattered the kunai than a volley of hidden shuriken erupted from their sleeves, converging on his exposed flank. Nathan seized the opening created when he stopped the first kunai, and the pair of mist-hidden ninjas immediately counterattacked. One lunged with a punch toward his head, while the other aimed a kick at his neck. Nathan's reflexes were razor-sharp. He dropped into a forward duck, narrowly slipping beneath the blow and springing back on his toes. Neither ninja hesitated. In unison, they drew kunai from their tool pouches. One swung in a wide slash, the other thrust straight for Nathan's chest. Nathan pivoted on his heel, leaning backward to evade the slashing blade, then brought his sword up in a single, fluid motion. The stabbing kunai clanged against the sword's edge with a crisp ding. Seeing his partner's weapon halted, the first ninja tried to shove Nathan off balance, but Nathan's feet were rooted, his chakra anchoring him to the earth so solidly that he didn't budge an inch. He used the attacker's forward momentum against him, slamming his sword hand down and forcing the kunai free from the ninja's grip. The moment the weapon clattered to the ground, Nathan surged forward, ready for the next phase of battle. Nathan's eyes narrowed. In one fluid motion, he flipped the knife's handle and drove the blade upward in a diagonal arc, aiming to cleave the mist-hidden ninja before him in two. Chapter 468, Tacit Understanding. Nathan's eyes blazed with intent as he drove his long sword in a deadly thrust toward Murakami-yu. Heart-pounding, Murakami-yu felt the murderous force behind the strike and reacted in an instant. He planted his toes, came to a sudden stop, then pivoted on his right foot, spinning 90 degrees to evade the blade as he slipped back. Nathan's sword whistled past empty air. He refocused, adjusting his stance in mid-motion. A flick of his wrist transformed the vertical chop into a swift, horizontal arc aimed directly at Murakami-yu's waist. With equal speed, Murakami-yu sprang upward, the blade's edge grazing nothing but air as he narrowly escaped. Just as Nathan prepared to press the attack, a shadow slipped in beside him. A second ninja from the mist-hidden village leapt forward, kunai raised in a vicious slash toward Nathan's neck. Sensing the newfound threat, Nathan abandoned his pursuit of Murakami-yu. He crossed his sword against the incoming kunai, steel meeting steel in a sharp, echoing clang. Ding! Metal ground against metal as Nathan held his parry. The two fighters froze for a heartbeat, eyes locked, each poised to strike again in the sudden hush that followed. Nathan and the hidden mist shinobi strained against each other, each fighting to seize the initiative. Their kunai and blade hissed as they clashed, sparks scattering in a brief, dazzling shower. Locked in a stalemate, Nathan barely noticed Murakami-yu, who had been shadowing the fight, shift his stance behind his opponent. In one smooth motion, Murakami-yu drove his kunai toward Nathan's heart. A jolt of alarm shot through Nathan, and he snapped his arm back, narrowly avoiding a fatal strike. But in pulling back, he surrendered the advantage he'd worked so hard to gain. The very moment he retreated, the mist ninja who had been wrestled to a halt seized the opening and swept in with renewed ferocity. Nathan had no choice but to raise his sword. Steel rang against steel as he met the attack head-on. For a few heartbeats, the three combatants danced an intricate triangle of blades, metal screaming against metal. Under normal circumstances, Nathan's swordsmanship would let him claw his way back into control, even after losing the initiative. But tonight, with Murakami-yu pressing from one side and the mist ninja from the other, Nathan found himself outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Nathan watched carefully as the two mist shinobi before him closed ranks. Whenever one showed an opening, the other was quick to cover it. These were no mere one-skill specialists, but fully trained jonin whose abilities surpassed those of ordinary village elites. Even in their brief exchange, it was clear to Nathan that, without resorting to his Mangekyo Sharingan, overpowering them single-handedly would be impossible. But he wasn't worried. He let their blades clash, then shifted his gaze to the wider battlefield. Konoha's forces held a defensive line, yet they weren't pinned down. Small counterattacks flared up whenever the mist shinobi advanced. That steady stream of retaliation told him everything he needed to know. The village wasn't under unbearable strain. There was no urgency for him to force a breakthrough. Instead, Nathan decided to use this challenge to sharpen his own skills. Every thrust and parry with these two elite opponents was an opportunity to refine his swordsmanship and, more importantly, to master his instant sword technique to a razor's edge. With quiet confidence, he settled into the fight, determined to turn this duel into the greatest lesson of his young career. Deciding he'd wasted enough time, Nathan pushed aside all doubts and focused entirely on the two Kirigakure veterans before him. Strangely, their side held back. No reinforcements came as the three of them clashed in fierce combat. Perhaps Kirigakure was too stretched to spare extra shinobi, or maybe they simply wanted to see how this battle played out. In either case, Nathan found himself room to maneuver. The two senior ninjas unleashed everything they had: brutal taijutsu flurries, powerful ninjutsu, even intricate genjutsu, in an unrelenting bid to end him. Yet Nathan remained eerily calm, parrying and countering each assault with measured precision. Unless absolutely necessary, he refused to go beyond his blade. Time and again, he employed his signature instant sword technique, slicing so swiftly that it felt as if he were sharpening his own skills at the expense of his opponents. Despite their combined might, neither veteran could land a decisive blow. As Nathan had acknowledged earlier, without using his trump card, the Mangekyo Sharingan, overpowering such formidable foes quickly was all but impossible. Now, taking the initiative, he proved just how challenging that task could be. Nathan's shift into full defense changes everything. There's simply no way his opponents can force an opening against him, and that's why he remains so unshakably calm. Time drifts by. Before he can glance at his watch, 30 minutes have passed in Nathan's duel with the two mist shinobi. For Jonin-level fighters, half an hour is barely a warm-up. For mid- and lower-ranked ninja, however, the strain on chakra reserves and physical endurance is punishing. With every chakra cell expended and every muscle fiber screaming in protest, fatigue creeps in, and fatigue breeds mistakes. And in shinobi combat, mistakes mean vulnerabilities. Battles are won by masking your own flaws while probing relentlessly for your opponents. It won't be long before both sides start paying the price in serious injuries. The fight will edge ever closer to a white-hot crescendo. Yet Nathan scarcely spares the prospect a second thought. As long as the village hidden in the leaves holds firm, he knows nothing of real consequence can happen. Nathan knew that life and death in the shinobi world often came down to luck, but right now, all he cared about was perfecting his instant sword technique. In just the last 30 minutes, sparring relentlessly with two Jonin opponents had boosted his proficiency by nearly 500 points. That surge pushed his skill ever closer to the flawless, level 7 mastery he craved. Such an opportunity was too valuable to squander. He'd stripped off his training gear, save for his sword, to make every test as fair as possible. Standing barefoot in the misty courtyard, he offered himself as a target, inviting any challenger to cross blades with him. It wasn't long before Murakami Yu and another mist-hidden ninja took the bait. After a brief clash, the two seasoned shinobi realized they'd been reduced to nothing more than live practice dummies for Nathan's technique drills. Yet they had no choice but to play along. In half an hour of desperate effort, neither had landed a single decisive blow. Calls for backup were out of the question. Ozawa Yuki had already made it clear there were no reinforcements to spare. And retreat was forbidden. Their orders were explicit: keep Nathan occupied at all costs. Standing before him, Murakami Yu exchanged a tense glance with her partner. Both knew they were trapped in this endless spar, but disobedience carried its own risks. So they readied their stances once more, determined to hold him off long enough, if only to fulfill their mission. They're here, and Nathan is only using them to hone his skills. Once they walk away, who knows whether he'll turn on the rest of the Mist Ninjas. Even if he spares them, if Nathan fights at full strength, the outcome could be disastrous. Under the circumstances, their best hope is to simply weather the storm. In villages like Konoha and Iwagakure, where ideological education is a point of pride, or in the warlike Kumogakure, shinobi will still lay down their lives for their home. But in the Blood Mist village, few hold such convictions. And even in those other villages, it's usually fresh graduates brimming with naivete who believe wholeheartedly in their cause. A taste of the village's darker side is enough to shatter most of those illusions, unless they're true idealists. With that in mind, Murakami Yu and another Mist ninja quietly agreed to serve as Nathan's sparring partners. They could neither kill him nor disobey direct orders to stay. By playing along, at least they stand the best chance of coming out of this alive. Nathan shifted his stance on the sandy training ground and glanced at his two teammates. Frankly, they believed they'd already done their part simply by keeping him here, out of the real jousts between the jonin. Why push any harder when this exact arrangement was what Captain Ozawa had asked of them? With that justification, neither of them felt the slightest remorse for slacking off. Nathan noticed their relaxed demeanors, but didn't let it distract him. All he needed was a sparring partner willing to help him refine his form. If these two refused, he could always find someone else. Fortunately, eventually they relented, and their cooperation spared him no small amount of effort. Before long, the three of them fell into a strange but effective rhythm, locking blades, retreating, and striking in swift, rehearsed sequences. With each clash, Nathan's command of the instant sword technique grew sharper and more assured. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he pushed himself through drill after drill, edging ever closer to the flawless 7th level of mastery. Chapter 469, Perfection. In autumn's chill, night comes early. Though the clock hasn't yet struck 7, darkness already blankets the battlefield. More than 2 hours have passed since the armies of Konoha and Kirigakure first clashed, and both sides are paying a steep price in blood and exhaustion. Without direct orders from their commanders, no one dares fall back. Every shinobi still fights on. Fortunately, the struggle is no longer confined to that narrow strip east of the Blackstone stronghold. Over time, the skirmishes have spread for kilometers in every direction, reaching all the way to the sea. For many warriors, this wider arena is a relief. When enemy forces are scattered, speed and stealth become as deadly as brute force. Rather than hacking through one foe after another in cramped quarters, a ninja can now slip into hiding, set traps, and strike from surprise, preserving precious energy with every ambush. Nathan showed no mercy to Murakami Yu and the other mist-hidden ninja. Although he appreciated their willingness to help him sharpen his skills, he wasn't about to give them an easy session. If he truly wanted to advance quickly, he had to push himself and them at full throttle. Half-hearted drills wouldn't cut it. Genuine progress demanded rigorous, technique-by-technique practice. For the past 2 hours, Nathan had barely granted his opponents a single breather. Outnumbered 2-1, Yu and her partner managed only occasional respites by rotating who faced Nathan directly. Without those brief intervals, they wouldn't have lasted at all. Still, even those rotations were few, because neither Yu nor her ally could hope to stand up to Nathan's full-power attacks alone. They had to combine their efforts just to hold their ground. Now, all three were running on fumes, muscles trembling with fatigue, but Nathan refused to let up until he'd squeezed every ounce of improvement from the session. Nathan stood in stark contrast to his opponents. He was still only a teenager, nowhere near full physical maturity, so by all rights, his strength should have lagged behind theirs. Yet here he was, more than 2 hours into a 1-on-2 fight, and not a hint of fatigue showed on his face. Murakami Yu and the other mist shinobi exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the Uchiha clan's Sharingan could sharpen perception and boost mental resolve, but they had never heard of it enhancing raw physical power. Clearly, Nathan's secret lay elsewhere. His physique stat on the panel read a staggering 19 points. In over 2 years of observing shinobi, genin, chunin, even jonin, none had ever cracked 10 points unless blessed with an exceptional bloodline. At first glance, 19 might sound like less than double the average, but the panel's growth curve is exponential. Each additional point multiplies physical ability far more dramatically than the last, which meant Nathan's 19 points placed him leagues beyond any ordinary ninja. Nathan estimated that his physical prowess was at least 5 to 7 times that of an ordinary shinobi. His stamina alone outmatched theirs, even if they could draw on chakra reserves, yet he boasted an even larger chakra pool than most ninjas. With these combined advantages, he held the upper hand from the start. Before him, 2 mist nins struggled to catch their breath, but Nathan showed no sign of mercy. A green aura flared across his body as he activated the instant sword technique once more. In an instant, he surged forward, closing the gap between them. Clang! Clang! Metal rang sharply against metal as Nathan's blade met theirs in a furious exchange. Each parry and riposte honed his skill further, and he felt a rush of exhilaration with every perfected movement. He reveled in the challenge and in the steady improvement of his technique. But there was little comfort for Murakami Yu and the other mist ninja. Their defenses strained under Nathan's unrelenting assault, and sweat glistened on their brows. With each new advance, Nathan pressed them harder, his blade a blur of green light. The 2, Hidden Leaf Shinobi, found themselves cornered by his overwhelming speed and power, desperately struggling to keep pace. Nathan's eyes burned with focused intensity. He would not let up until his opponents collapsed, utterly defeated by the man who had, in every respect, surpassed the limits of a normal ninja. Nathan's relentless training of the instant sword technique was taking its toll on his opponents. Fatigued and outmatched, the 2 mist nin had once managed to keep pace by swapping rest breaks, covering for one another's weaknesses. But now, even that teamwork was unraveling. Unless they zeroed in completely on Nathan's every movement, they found themselves reacting just a moment too late. Worse still was the psychological strain. Each exchange left them with the nagging sense that Nathan was growing stronger, faster, sharper right before their eyes. Every clash seemed to refine his skill, amplifying their own mistakes until they could no longer hide them. As the duel dragged on, their confidence unraveled, and gaps in their defense sprang open. Swish! In an instant, Nathan materialized at Murakami Yu's flank with his instant sword technique. The other mist ninja, momentarily stunned, neither dodged nor raised his blade. With clinical precision, Nathan slashed across Murakami's right forearm, metal biting through flesh and drawing a ragged line of blood. The sound of the blade's passage echoed, marking a clear turning point in the battle. Nathan's blade would have cut through his opponent's bones if he hadn't eased off at the last moment, but even so, the slash left a grievous wound across the man's arm. Nathan hadn't channeled any wind-release chakra into the strike. The Kusanagi's blade was simply that lethal, shearing through flesh and sinew without effort. A solitary drop of blood fell to the ground. For a heartbeat, Nathan and the 2 mist shinobi standing beside him were frozen in disbelief. It wasn't that Nathan had finally hurt their adversary. Both sides had been clashing for over 2 hours, and Nathan had already scarred them more than once. What took them aback was how effortlessly he now had drawn blood. It was a clear sign that these 2 could no longer pressure him as they had before. Shaking off his surprise, Nathan pressed the attack. He stepped forward, closing the distance, and swung the Kusanagi again in a swift, decisive arc. But Murakami Yu was ready. With a quick pivot and a leap, he escaped the strike and darted out of reach before Nathan's sword could find its mark. Another Mist Village shinobi darted forward, kunai in hand, hoping to throw Nathan off balance. Nathan barely flinched. He drew a breath, channeled chakra into his blade, and with a flash of green light, unleashed the instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he closed the gap to Murakami Yu, who was hurtling backwards so fast he nearly looked like a blur. Murakami Yu skidded to a halt, planting his feet and raising his kunai into a defensive arc. His eyes locked on Nathan, ready to strike, but Nathan simply stopped, his sword humming with latent energy. Another surge of green chakra enveloped him, a second activation of instant sword technique. With a barely audible whoosh, Nathan's form vanished. Moments later, he reappeared at Yu's right side. Before Yu could react, Nathan's blade flashed out in a precise, sweeping strike, an echo of the same assault Yu had just tried to launch. The instant replay of technique and counter left Yu wide open, and Nathan's next move would decide it all. Chapter 470, Beheading Murakami. Yu spotted Nathan's long sword slicing in from his right side. Instinctively, he twisted his wrist to bring up the kunai in his hand, hoping to block the attack. But a fresh wound on his right arm had sapped the joint's flexibility, and Nathan's strike was too sudden, too precise. Swish. The blade ripped through flesh and sinew. Arf! Murakami screamed as blood spurted from the wound. Nathan's sword, infused with tightly compressed wind-release chakra, carved clean through the arm. The severed limb fell to the ground, blood pooling in dark rivulets beneath it. Staggering back, Murakami fought the burning agony, leaping away to put distance between himself and his attacker. But Nathan showed no hesitation. The instant Murakami's retreat slowed, Nathan unleashed the instant sword technique, vanishing and reappearing at lightning speed right before his opponent. Before Murakami could brace himself, Nathan's blade was already arcing toward him once more. Nathan barely had time to react before the figure in front of him revealed itself as another mist ninja. Everything had happened too quickly. Blades flashed through the air so fast he'd almost been overwhelmed. Now at last, he had room to breathe, and he refused to hold back. Swish, swish, swish. A trio of sharp shuriken cut through the dim light. Instinctively, Nathan abandoned his plan to counterattack and darted aside, the first trio whizzing harmlessly past him. But the mist ninja pressed the advantage, hurling a rapid volley of kunai in his direction. Nathan's head snapped around in time to catch the glint of metal. With his Sharingan flaring to life, all three Magatama in his iris spun as he scoured each flying blade. There, wrapped inconspicuously around the handle of one kunai, was a hidden talisman, a detonator seal that, if treated like an ordinary throw, would surely maim him on impact. Thanks to his unwavering vigilance, he'd spotted it the instant it came into view. In a heartbeat, Nathan traced the knife's trajectory, ready to turn the tables on his relentless adversary. Nathan snatched a kunai from his pouch and tossed it without hesitation. The two blades met midair with a sharp ring, sparks dancing before they clattered apart and flew off in opposite directions. Then came a thunderous boom. The explosion barely fazed Nathan. He slipped past the remaining kunai with ease, then flowed straight into his instant sword technique, sprinting after Murakami as he limped toward the shoreline, one hand pressed to a bleeding wound on his right arm. Even with a Kirigakure Jonin trailing close behind, Nathan closed the distance in an instant. Their weapons clashed again, steel against steel, until a second Jonin from Kirigakure joined the fray. But Murakami-Yu's injury had already sapped his strength, and without his strongest ally, the two Jonin proved no match for Nathan's speed and precision. In moments, both opponents were disarmed and sent sprawling to the sand. Nathan stood over them, unwavering. The loss of an arm had tipped the scales decisively, and without Murakami-Yu to back them up, even seasoned Kirigakure Shinobi fell before his blade. Nathan seized the moment. In a blur of motion, he slashed one of the Kirigakure Jonin across the ribs, carving a wound so deep the bone lay exposed. Both Jonin staggered, their breaths ragged. As Nathan closed the distance, they exchanged a desperate glance and shouted in unison, "Fall back." In the next instant, each man hurled a smoke bomb to the ground with a sharp clink. Dark purple haze billowed out, carrying a pungent sting that swiftly filled the clearing. The noxious cloud swallowed Nathan in seconds, blurring his vision and dulling his senses. He could no longer pinpoint his opponent's positions. This wasn't ordinary cover smoke, but a specialized gas designed to disorient. Unfazed, Nathan dropped into a hand seal. His breath caught as he whispered the words of his jutsu. Wind style, great breakthrough. A roaring gale erupted from his lips, slicing through the air, violet mist in a thunderous wave. The blast radiated outward in a sweeping arc, clearing the smoke and forcing the two injured Jonin to shield their eyes against the sudden rush of wind. The dense smoke that had cloaked the clearing split apart in an instant. Nathan blinked, and there they were, 7, maybe 8 figures materializing through the haze. Half of them bore the scarred visage of Murakami-Yu. The others were the same Kirigakure Jonin he'd just faced. Clearly, the two of them had used the shadow clone technique to throw him off. Then Nathan froze. Murakami-Yu was missing an arm. There was no way Yu could form the hand seals needed to produce that many clones. So those doppelgangers must have been created by Yu's teammate, and some of them masquerading as Yu himself. They really are close, Nathan muttered. Even after losing an arm, he's protecting his comrade. Without hesitation, Nathan crossed his hands to form the Ren seal. Shadow clone jutsu, he intoned. In the very next heartbeat, his own 8 shadow clones sprang into existence, encircling him in perfect formation, ready to meet the Mist Ninja head-on. Nathan gave no further orders before the shadow clones surged forward in pursuit of Murakami Yu and the other Mist hidden ninja's decoys. At the same moment, he formed a tight seal and activated his ninjutsu, the mind-to-heart technique, linking every clone directly to his consciousness. Now, whenever any of them detected the enemy's true body, all would know instantly and respond without hesitation. Experience had taught him that the shadow clone technique alone was no guarantee of safety, especially against opponents brimming with chakra. Splitting his forces into one-on-one engagements would have spelled disaster. But with his mental network in place, none of his clones ever lost track of their quarry. Before long, they had uncovered both real bodies. The outcome was swift and decisive. Nathan ordered one clone to subdue Murakami Yu, whose strength was already critically depleted. While that trap snapped shut, Nathan himself darted off to confront the remaining Mist Ninja. In a blur of speed and precision, he cut the enemy down. He then returned to finish Murakami Yu, ending the chase in a matter of heartbeats. 2 long-standing adversaries lay defeated at his feet, proof, once again, of Nathan's mastery. Nathan finally had the headspace to absorb the insights he'd gained when his instant sword technique reached full maturity. In truth, the technique leveled up at the very moment he severed Murakami Yu's right arm. But amid the chaos of battle, he hadn't been able to reflect on what that meant. Now, with the fight behind him, he could at last explore and internalize the true power of his perfected skill. Chapter 471, Retreat. Nathan glanced around to make sure he was alone, then plunged into mastering his newest insight. The perfection of his snap sword technique had changed everything. Take, for example, the pause between 2 uses of his instant sword maneuver. Before reaching level 7, no matter how fast he struck, there was always a brief hesitation. Now, that gap had all but disappeared. It was precisely this advance that let him catch Murakami Yu off guard, slipping from Yu's front to his side in a heartbeat and severing his arm. Even though Yu's right limb was wounded, he would never have given Nathan such an opening without Nathan's near-instant follow-through. Later, against another Kirigakure Jonin, this same mastery carried him swiftly into level 7 perfection of the snap sword technique. Nathan could already envision the future. The name Ghost Sword would live up to itself, and with each passing minute, his legend only grew. Nathan finally opened his eyes. He didn't linger. He picked a direction and took off at a run. He was eager to test his new instant sword technique and to gather more chakra. Although he'd spent the last 2 hours fighting with sword skills, the repeated use of that instantaneous slash had drained him. To keep improving his other abilities, he had to replenish his chakra reserves, and quickly. This battle's dragged on long enough. Time to end it, he thought, pushing himself even harder. South of the Blackstone stronghold, in a broad, open clearing, Uchiha Shisui twisted his body and used his kunai to deflect an incoming ice needle. Across from him stood a young jonin from Kirigakure, long black hair, pale skin, and an almost androgynous air that made their gender impossible to read at a glance. Their next volley of attacks sent dozens of tiny crystalline spikes slicing through the air, each one glinting like a shard of winter. Shisui tightened his grip on the kunai, ready for whatever came next. Nathan recognized the technique at once. Ice release, specifically the ice escape. Coupled with his opponent's mastery of mist-style ninjutsu, it was clear this shinobi hailed from Kirigakure's Snow Clan. Members of that clan, especially the younger generation, often possessed strikingly androgynous features. When their Kekkei Genkai awakened, those traits only became more pronounced. The mist ninja standing before him was a perfect example. At first glance, you couldn't even tell his gender. Nathan had made the same mistake. By the time the rival shinobi condensed a volley of razor-sharp ice needles, Nathan had snapped out of his surprise and leapt into action. He drew several kunai, calculated the enemy's likely trajectory, and launched them straight for his vitals. Shewuwa, sensing sudden danger, twisted in midair. She stole a quick look at Nathan, abandoned her ongoing assault on Uchiha Shisui, and narrowly evaded the incoming kunai. Because they'd never clashed before, Nathan couldn't read Shewua's habits with any real precision. His kunai felt like wild guesses, and the distance between them gave Shewua just enough time to slip clear of each throw. Yet even as he dodged, Shewua's face remained tense. He knew that facing Uchiha Shisui alone would be risky, and now that Nathan had joined the fray, the battle could go any which way. As Shewua hesitated over whether to press his attack or fall back, Nathan struck again. He sent another volley of kunai hurtling forward, 2 of them secretly tagged with explosives. At first, Shewua detected nothing unusual. But the moment the weapon sliced past his guard, a jolt of alarm shot through him. He spun aside, rolling out of the blast's radius. That split-second evasion was exactly what Nathan had been waiting for. A burst of green chakra flared around him, and in an instant he vanished, only to reappear directly beside Shewua, kunai poised at his throat. "What?" Shewua stammered, eyes wide with shock at Nathan's sudden materialization. Nathan's reflexes kicked in the moment Shewua struck. Instinctively, he activated his blood succession boundary, channeling chakra through his outstretched hand to form a solid ice shield. Without hesitation, he brought his long knife down on the barrier. The blade bit into the ice with a high-pitched screech, spraying a shower of frost crystals into the air. Though the sword carved a deep gouge, it could not break through to Shewua, becoming firmly lodged in the shield. Seizing the opening, Shewua inhaled deeply and expelled a furious blast of frigid air that slammed into Nathan's face. The biting cold stung like needles. Gritting his teeth, Nathan focused inward and injected his blade with a surge of fire chakra. Flames licked along the steel, instantly melting the spreading ice. Feeling his knife slide free, he yanked it from the shield and leapt back, narrowly escaping the lingering frost. The 2 combatants faced off amid swirling snow and steaming air, fire against ice, will against will. Only then did Uchiha Shisui, hidden at the edge of the clearing, realize that Nathan had returned to the battlefield. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Uchiha Shisui materialized at Nathan's side. He glanced at Shewua and asked quietly, "Nathan, how's your end?" Without looking away from their opponent, Nathan replied, "It's done." Shisui offered a small, knowing nod, but Shewua's expression twisted with anger. He remembered Ozawa Yuki's orders. Nathan had been entrusted to 2 of their most experienced shinobi. If Nathan claimed the fight was over, those 2 must be dead, and losing them would cripple his side's elite strength. Before Shewua could react, Nathan and Shisui struck in perfect unison. Nathan activated his instant sword technique, appearing instantly at Shewua's flank and sweeping his longsword in a lethal arc. At the same moment, Shisui hurled a chained kunai that wrapped around Shewua's chakra points, momentarily cutting off his energy flow. Taken by surprise, Shewua barely managed to sidestep the blade. The attack left him off balance, struggling to recover, even as Nathan and Shisui closed in for the kill. Nathan seized the opening and pressed the attack. Calling upon his newly mastered level 7 instant sword technique, he struck in such rapid succession that his form blurred into a ghostly afterimage. Only the flash of his blade revealed where he'd been. Shewua found himself driven onto the defensive, unable to counter Nathan's relentless onslaught. Meanwhile, Uchiha Shisui slipped in from the shadows, landing precise, opportunistic strikes that compounded Shewua's disadvantage. Just as Shewua's guard began to falter, a massive firework erupted overhead, showering the night sky in brilliant scarlet and gold. His expression went slack with recognition. Though Nathan and Shisui exchanged confused glances, Shewua knew exactly what the display meant. It was the signal to withdraw. With that, he released his hold on the battle. Granting himself a swift bow of acknowledgement, Shewua melted back into the swirling smoke, leaving Nathan and Shisui alone beneath the drifting sparks. Chapter 4472, Harvest. When Shewua saw Nathan and Uchiha Shisui fixated on the giant firework, he didn't hesitate. He poured all his chakra into his legs, his speed surging as he sprinted toward the shoreline. Huh? Nathan watched Shewua's retreat and immediately understood the meaning behind the signal flare, but he had no intention of giving chase. His true objective had been to test the fully perfected instant sword technique, and in the process, gather some chakra. Meeting Shewua on the battlefield had been pure chance. and now that he'd proven the sword's power against such a strong opponent, there was no need to prolong the fight. His next priority was to intercept the chakra quota that Kirigakure had flagged for retrieval. Since the Mist Village had already sent out their withdrawal signal, all Nathan had to do was position himself to claim their harvest. Nathan didn't hesitate. He channeled his chakra into a hand seal, called forth Wind Release, Tengu Wing, and shot skyward. Before he went, he called back to Uchiha Shisui. "Shisui, I'll leave him to you. I need to check out the other areas." Without waiting for an answer, Nathan spread his wind-forged wings and vanished into the clouds. Shisui watched him go, a flicker of envy passing through his dark eyes. Nathan's effortless flair was hard to ignore. He banished the feeling, though. There was no time for distractions. Shisui turned his gaze to where Shuewa had fled. He leapt into the air, eyes narrowed in determination. Even if the enemy's retreat wouldn't immediately tip the scales of this battle, capturing Shuewa now could save lives in the next one. With that thought, he pursued. On the other side, Nathan soared into the sky, putting any nearby duel out of his mind. He unleashed the full power of his 3 Magatama Sharingan, its faint glow illuminating the battlefield below. Through its lens, he watched the Mist Ninja's every move. No sooner had the signal firework blossomed overhead than the Kirigakure Shinobi grew uneasy. One by one, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups, they abandoned their positions and sprinted toward the shore. Nathan's hunch was confirmed. The mist was withdrawing. With that realization, he centered himself and began weighing potential targets. The skirmish zone covered several kilometers in every direction. During the heat of battle, no one had the time to leave it. But under full speed, a skilled ninja could cross that distance in mere minutes, and those few minutes would be Nathan's only chance. Worse still, the retreating forces were scattering, making it unlikely he'd get more than 1 or 2 clear openings. He had to choose wisely and strike fast. Nathan scanned the battlefield, weighing his options. To gather as much chakra as possible, he couldn't afford wasted effort. He needed to pick his targets wisely. First, the senior ninja teams were out of the question. Even the weakest jonin, if they put up a fight, could force him to expend more chakra than he'd recover. Engaging them would be a net loss, far too risky and time-consuming. Next, the genin. Alone or scattered genin offered little reward. Their chakra reserves were simply too small to justify an attack. And after more than 2 hours of fighting, few genin remained alive, let alone concentrated in groups. Nathan crossed them off his list. That left the chunin, but not just any chunin. Solo chunin could either possess unusual abilities that slowed him down or be so depleted that they yielded only a trickle of chakra. Neither scenario served his purpose. In the end, Nathan's eyes settled on the small squads of chunin moving together. They were neither too powerful nor too weak, just the right balance for a swift, efficient strike. Attacking them would deliver the highest chakra return for the least effort. With his decision made, Nathan melted into the shadows, already plotting his approach. All sorts of thoughts raced through his mind as Nathan hovered overhead, scanning the forest floor for the perfect targets. In the dead of night, he drifted like a silent shadow, his crimson Sharingan eyes sweeping every flicker of movement below. At once, he caught sight of them. A trio of Mist Ninja Chunin traveling together along a dimly lit trail. Without hesitation, Nathan dropped from the treetops, vanishing into the darkness behind them. Down below, Iwasaki Shoichi and his 2 comrades pushed through the underbrush, their breaths steaming in the cool night air. Abruptly, a shroud of shadow swallowed Shoichi. Instinctively, he skidded to a halt and looked up, only to lock eyes with those twin blood-red tomoe. "What is this?" he whispered, heart pounding. Before he could warn his friends, the world tilted. The illusion flooded his mind, and he collapsed to the ground in a daze. "Shoichi!" his partners cried, screeching to a stop and whipping around, horror written across their faces as they saw him fall. Before they could check on Iwasaki Shoichi, a third figure slipped into view. It was Nathan. Both Kirigakure Chunin, one of them Isamu Harada, froze at once, instantly recognizing him. In their heads, they each toyed with the idea of abandoning Shoichi and fleeing on their own, but neither dared turn their backs completely. As the 3 stared each other down, Nathan's Sharingan flared to life. In an instant, he wove an illusion that ensnared one of them, freezing his movements. The other reacted just as quickly. Nathan summoned a gust of chakra, activating his wind escape wind wings and landing nimbly on both feet. Before the stunned Chunin could recover, Nathan drew the long tanto from his sash, assumed a fighting stance, and prepared to strike. With a sharp exhale, he swung the blade in a deadly arc toward the back of Harada's neck. Sensing the danger, Harada lunged forward, rolling out of the way in a single, fluid motion. He landed on his side, sprang to his feet, and squared off against Nathan. No escape? He thought, so it's fight to the death. Izamu Harada glanced up, expecting to see Nathan's figure, but found nothing. "Where are you going?" he called, unease creeping into his voice as he scanned their surroundings. Before he could react, the air beside him ripped with a sudden sharp crack. In his peripheral vision, a flash of steel caught the light. Izamu cursed under his breath and tried to dodge, but it was too late. A sickening thunk echoed as Nathan's long knife slashed through Izamu's left arm. Instantly, the arm dropped to the ground, severed. At the same moment, Nathan's blade carved a second wound across Isamu's waist so deep that bone showed and blood gushed in a crimson arc. The Chunin staggered and collapsed, wailing in agony as life seemed to drain from him. Nathan's expression never wavered. As Izamu hit the earth, Nathan molded his chakra and whispered the hand seals for his mystic shackle technique. Glowing bindings erupted from the ground, coiling around Izamu's legs and torso to pin him in place. In seconds, excluding the few moments spent hunting his prey, all three Kirigakure Chunin lay silently bound and bleeding. Nathan sheathed his knife calmly. Though the success of his attack owed much to surprise, there was no denying the deadly power of his instant sword technique. Just as with the last Kirigakure Chunin, Nathan would once have had to push himself harder, but not anymore. Now he could cut them down effortlessly. The snap sword technique's refinement has once again raised the floor of his close-quarters prowess. Its advantage may be subtle against Jonin, but it becomes glaringly obvious when he faces Jinin. Chapter 473, After the War. A hushed stillness settled over the ruined battlefield as Nathan knelt beside the fallen mist ninja, Harada Yong. The acrid scent of blood and smoke hung in the air. Without hesitation, Nathan formed the swift hand seals of the chakra absorption technique, sealing off his own chakra flow and opening a conduit to his opponent's energy. Harada Yong's breathing was ragged, blood seeped from multiple wounds, staining the earth beneath him. Nathan's eyes flicked to the ribbon of chakra arcing between them. Pale and thin, he frowned. The amount of energy he was drawing was far below his expectations. Two facts explained the scant return. First, Yong's grievous injuries had already bled away most of his physical and spiritual strength. Second, the brutal 2-hour skirmish had leached much of his chakra reserves before Nathan even began. While the long fight had been unavoidable, Nathan realized he had room to improve on his timing. Releasing the seal, he stood and sheathed his sword, the clang echoing in the sudden quiet. Young kunai and splintered wood littered the field. Nathan took a slow breath, wincing at the metallic tang in his mouth. He would need to refine his approach, faster seals, cleaner absorption, to prevent his quarry's energy from draining away with every drop of blood. As he stepped back from Harada Young's still form, Nathan vowed that next time there'd be no wasted moments and no wasted chakra. Nathan retracted his palm and glanced at his chakra monitor. 3,000 points? He shook his head in disappointment. With a snap of his fingers, the first mist Chunin collapsed to the ground. Without hesitation, Nathan moved on to the remaining 2 Chunin, sealing each hand in the chakra absorption technique to draw out their life energy. Within seconds, both their mental and physical reserves were sapped clean. He paused to recheck his chakra, about 15,000 points added. Less than he'd hoped for, but enough to keep going. Nathan ignored the 3 unconscious bodies at his feet. He raised both hands, formed the sealing sign, and invoked Wind Style, Wind Wings. A pair of translucent feathered wings burst from his back, lifting him into the sky. He scanned the horizon for more targets. 3 minutes later, he spotted another mist squad fleeing across the valley floor, a team of 4 Chunin and 2 Ginin, hotly pursued by a squad from Konoha. A grin flickered across Nathan's face. Their pursuers hadn't noticed him yet. He flexed his wings and dived, already planning how he'd harvest enough chakra this time to power his next move. Nathan dispatched the Mist Ninja Squad without breaking a sweat. Once the trailing Konoha team escaped, he turned his attention to his captives and activated his level 6 chakra absorption technique. At 2,000 chakra points per second, and with 100% efficiency, he drained all 6 shinobi in under a minute, harvesting 35,000 chakra points. Adding that to the 18,000 he'd already siphoned and his existing reserves, Nathan's chakra pool swelled to roughly 100,000 points, nearly his maximum capacity. With his energy stores full, he saw no reason to pursue further targets. Tracking down fleeing ninjas would prove far more difficult than rounding up civilians. In the minutes following the retreat signal, most Kiri operatives had vanished into the mist. Even if he tried, their escape methods were too varied and sophisticated to make quick work of. Besides, Nathan had another assignment waiting. Not long ago, Yamanaka Aoi had relayed Sano Nobuhisa's orders. He was to shadow the main force of Kirigakure and ensure their complete evacuation. No ambush, no surprise strike. It was a mission he knew all too well. Nathan watched as the failed Kirigakure assault ships limped back toward Feiyu town, exactly as they had the last time. This reconnaissance mission, however, posed no real threat to him. Having long since mastered the wind-style flying jutsu, he felt more than ready. He took a moment to inspect his gear, reinforcing his strap of kunai and shuriken before assuming the necessary hand seals. Wind-style, winged wind, he intoned. Instantly, a pair of pale blue chakra wings blossomed from his back. Nathan flexed them once, and with a single fluid motion, he launched himself into the night sky. A few moments later, he reached the eastern coastline, where the Mist Ninja fleet lay anchored on the dark sea. Under the rising moonlight, the dozen or so ships gleamed silver, but none were preparing to depart. Clusters of mist shinobi milled on deck, waiting for the final command before setting sail. The reinforcements, it seemed, would not arrive in time to alter the previous outcome. Hovering silently above, Nathan relayed his observations back to base. Below him, the enemy remained motionless, and the perfect opportunity was his to seize. Nathan hovered high above the Mist Shinobi staging ground, weighing his options. He could easily drop down and unleash a few fire-style escape jutsu, level the formation, and vanish before they even knew what hit them. His level 5 wind escape, Wind Wings, gave him unrivaled speed and maneuverability. It was hardly risky, but why expend chakra for a hollow victory? There was no gain in helping his enemies, only wasted effort. So Nathan remained motionless in midair, silent and patient, waiting for the fleet to depart on its mission. 10 minutes later, the mist, hidden shinobi finally fell into ranks and moved out. By then, word of Nathan's presence had clearly spread below. At the first glimpse of movement overhead, they froze, weapons raised and gazes darting upward. When Nathan stayed perfectly still, their tension eased into an outward calm. He didn't buy it for a second. He knew their nerves were as taut as ever, concealed behind forced composure. Nathan hovered high above the Blackstone stronghold, eyes sharp for any sign of movement among the Mist Ninja flying below. He refused to believe they could relax with an enemy so exposed overhead. They were no doubt biding their time, waiting for him to close in, only to catch him off guard. Too bad, they were about to reveal their every move to a man who refused to be drawn into their trap. Time slipped by unnoticed. An hour passed, and at last, the Kirigakure aerial squadron drifted clear of the fortress. They weren't preparing to fight, they were retreating. Nathan's mission, however, wasn't to engage them in battle, but to determine their final destination. Regulations forbade him from breaking off pursuit until he could confirm exactly where they planned to land. At their current speed, the fleet would need several hours more to reach Feiyu town. Tailing them that long in the sky promised nothing but tedium. Though it would undoubtedly sharpen his wind escape and wind wings techniques, he reasoned that he could train more efficiently elsewhere. With a quiet exhalation, Nathan eased away from the dissipating formation. Gathering a gentle gust of wind beneath his feet, he descended toward the dark waters below. He planned to land on the open sea, regroup, and chart a faster course to Feiyu town, where he would finally learn the true purpose behind the Mist Ninja's retreat. Nathan stepped into the clearing, raised his hands, and crossed his palms into the Ren hand seal. With a sharp exhalation of chakra, 9 perfect copies of himself erupted from a cloud of pale smoke. He pointed to one clone. "You've got the Kirigakure fleet. Follow them, watch their every move, and come back with a report." The clone inclined its head once. Without hesitation, it formed another seal, unleashed wind-release wings of wind, and shot upward, vanishing into the sky along the fleet's projected path. Nathan turned to the remaining 8 replicas. "The rest of you with me. Let's make the most of this time." They all nodded, then fell into step behind him. Together, they sprinted across the rugged trail toward the reef-fringed beach they'd memorized. There, they would launch straight into training. No idle moments, until their scout returned with news of the Mist Ninja's Move Me. Chapter 474. Planning night had already fallen over the reef beach when Nathan was still out on the sand, practicing his forms beneath the pale moonlight. Suddenly, a lone figure materialized on the far horizon. At first it seemed suspended in midair, but within moments it drew closer, hovered, then descended gracefully to land before him. Nathan opened his eyes. It was his own shadow clone, the one he'd sent ahead to track the Kirigakure fleet's movements. "What's the situation?" he asked. "Nothing unusual," the clone reported, shaking his head. "But I've sent you the full report." With a simple hand gesture, the clone dispelled. Instantly, a surge of chakra-laced memories flooded Nathan's mind. He closed his eyes and sifted through the stream of images, rocky shoals they'd passed, endless stretches of ocean, the silhouettes of patrolling ships. He skimmed past those quickly. The final sequence showed a squad of Kirigakure shinobi returning to Feiyu Town. No surprises there, either. Moments later, Nathan opened his eyes, a quiet relief settling over him. Everything was unfolding just as he'd anticipated. Nathan glanced at his status panel and noted the jump in his wind style, Wind Wings proficiency. He eased back his focus and let his gaze wander over the clearing. His 8 shadow clones were still hard at work, drilling their forms with meticulous precision. Nathan did a quick mental calculation. They'd wrap up their practice in no time. There was no need to dispel them just yet. He refocused on himself, bringing his hands together in a tight seal. First, he unleashed the Palm Immortal technique, pushing chakra through every fiber of his body. Then he shifted seamlessly into the Reflection Heart technique, guiding that same chakra into his Sharingan to accelerate its evolution and strengthen his physical form. Minutes slipped by in silent concentration. Before he realized it, well over an hour had passed and the final echoes of chakra dissipated into the air. Nathan's eyes snapped open. Around him, each shadow clone had independently ceased training. He raised a hand and dispelled the shadow clone technique. In an instant, they vanished, leaving behind nothing but the wealth of experience and memory they'd gathered. Nathan allowed himself a satisfied nod. The next phase of his journey was about to begin. Nathan closed his eyes and let the day's battles wash over him, replaying every moment in his mind until each new technique and memory became second nature, etched into the mental panel he carried. 15 minutes later, he opened his eyes with a long, steadying breath and rubbed his temples, still throbbing from the effort. There was no time to linger. He formed the seals in an instant and unleashed wind style, wind wings, twin currents of air blossoming from his back. In moments, he'd lifted into the sky, steering himself toward the black stone stronghold. Technically, his mission wasn't over until he'd reported in, so he couldn't afford to get lost in personal training, no matter how tempting it was now that he'd mastered what he'd learned. As soon as he'd made his report and handed over his findings, he'd have all the time he wanted to push his skills further. At 100 meters per second, he sliced through the clouds. The mist-hidden fleet had taken over an hour to reach this outpost, but Nathan could return in less than 15 minutes. True to form, 10 minutes later, he hovered above the fortress, its steaming battlements still bristling with soldiers. The battle had just ended, and the Konoha ninjas inside hadn't yet dropped their guard. Nathan inhaled sharply, steadied himself, and signaled downward. His mission may have been complete, but duty, and the promise of a thorough debrief, awaited. As Nathan touched down, the assembled shinobi tensed at once. Moments later, though, recognition swept through the group, and their shoulders relaxed. Having verified that no one here was under threat, he landed fully and without hesitation strode toward the command center. 15 minutes later, Nathan Emmer, Ged. He'd just finished briefing Lord Sano Nobuhisa on the Mist Clan's movements, and in return had received the official tally of gains and losses from this engagement. By the numbers, Konoha's casualties versus the Mists came to roughly 1 to 1.2. That margin may sound slim, but it shouldn't be underestimated. In fact, it's only because the Mist Ninjas managed a lightning-fast landward ambush before hostilities formally began that our figures look this even. Without that initial strike, the ratio would have tilted even more decisively in our favor. The reason, ultimately, is simple. Kirigakure's shinobi excel in direct combat. In the end, this Fourth Ninja World War comes down to nothing more or less than raw strength. Nathan had learned the hard way that no amount of strategy can substitute for raw power. You might win a few skirmishes by outthinking your enemy, but without real strength, you'll never secure a lasting victory. Shaking his head, he dismissed the thought and turned toward his quarters. A few minutes later, he slipped into his room and set to work. Finding a clear patch of floor, he sat down cross-legged and launched into his drills. First, the palm fairy technique, then the reflection heart technique. His body ached from the 2 battles he'd fought back-to-back, but he still had training to finish before nightfall. For hours, he pushed through the burn in his muscles, not perfecting each movement, each breath. Only when the moon was high did he finally allow himself to stop. He rose stiffly, extinguished the single lantern in the corner, and collapsed onto his bed, sleep claiming him almost immediately. At dawn, Nathan awoke to pale light filtering through the paper windows. He sat on the edge of his futon for a long moment, gathering his wits, then rose and padded to the wash basin. As he splashed cold water on his face, he reviewed his situation. After last night's fiasco, the Mist Ninjas wouldn't dare strike Feiyu Town again for at least a day or two. That gave him a window, just enough time to train and prepare for whatever came next. Nathan finally had a brief reprieve, at least a day or two of relative freedom. Officially, he could use the time to cultivate his chakra, but he had something else in mind. After splashing cold water on his face and patting it dry with a towel, he slipped into his bedroom. On the nightstand lay a single, sealed scroll bearing a strange, silvery tassel. He picked it up, reverently undoing its bindings. Inside the scroll was the thing he'd taken months ago, an eye, alabaster white and motionless, harvested from a wayward shinobi named Ching. From the moment he secured it, Nathan had known exactly what he intended to do with this organ, but until now, the stars hadn't aligned. Today, however, was different. He murmured to himself, physical transformation, and sealed his hand around the scroll. Nathan shut his eyes and concentrated. A faint shimmer coursed through his veins as he unwrapped the scroll with his mind's eye, unlocking the power trapped within. When he reopened his eyes, the world looked sharper, the edges of objects more defined. Rising from the bed, he turned toward the window. His gaze pierced through the walls of the compound, drifted over the village, and cut straight southeast across rolling seas to a distant archipelago known as the Sea Country. This island nation lacked its own ninja forces and depended entirely on mercenaries borrowed from the water country for defense. But Nathan's interest in the Sea Country ran deeper than geopolitics. Somewhere among its sun-drenched isles lay Ghost World Island, a place of whispered legends and untold secrets. And now, with his newly awakened ability, he was ready to uncover every one of them. Nathan's memories of his past life told him exactly where to look. At the very start of the Third Ninja War, Orochimaru had secretly established a laboratory on Ghost Island devoted to cellular fusion research, with the ultimate goal of producing an amphibious shinobi capable of ambushing the Hidden Mist village. And 10 years later, the project was nowhere near perfected. Even Tianji, the lead test subject who had transformed himself into what Orochimaru hailed as the ideal fusion, proved only marginally stronger than an average jonin. But Nathan didn't seek raw power. What he needed was Orochimaru's arcane expertise in human body modification. Rather than simply replacing one of his eyes with a white, serpent's egg pupil, he intended to bioengineer a bespoke organ capable of integrating that eye seamlessly into his nervous system. Such a procedure demanded intimate knowledge of anatomy, chakra pathways, and experimental surgical techniques, precisely the sort of forbidden data stored within Orochimaru's Ghost Island lab. It was the perfect solution. The facility's remote location and layers of security meant Nathan could work in complete secrecy. As long as he executed every incision and ritual flawlessly, there was virtually no risk of discovery. He only had to reach Orochimaru's hidden archives, and the secrets of human transformation would be his. Thanks to his recent upgrade, Wind Style, Wind Wings reaching level 5, Nathan could now come and go without restriction. With every condition satisfied, the moment to act had finally arrived. Chapter 475, Landing on the Island. Nathan didn't hesitate. As soon as he made up his mind, he tucked the sealing scroll away, double-checked his equipment, and stepped out of his quarters. Without rushing, he stopped by the cafeteria for a quick meal. Once he'd eaten, he climbed to the training plaza, formed the hand seals for Wind Style, Wind Wings, and propelled himself into the sky. He cut through the air toward the open sea. A pair of Konoha Shinobi on routine patrol registered his chakra trail, but didn't intervene. Nathan's sporadic training flights over the water were no secret, yet they weren't cause for alarm. After more than 10 minutes of flight, he found himself far beyond the Blackstone stronghold, skimming over an endless expanse of blue. Satisfied he was unobserved, he checked his bearings and angled his course toward the sea country. With the wind at his back, Nathan pressed on, determined to reach the island swiftly. Nathan navigated the narrow channel that lay between the land of fire and the land of water. Unlike the bustling sea of waves, this route was little more than a backwater, hardly touched by the ongoing war. When he arrived at midday, everything looked peaceful and undisturbed. Yet, with his Sharingan's keen gaze, he spotted faint signs of hidden mist shinobi patrolling the banks. Even now, as the Mist Village concentrated its forces against Konoha, it refused to neglect its own defenses. Clearly, no stretch of water, however insignificant, was left unguarded. Satisfied that he wouldn't be followed, Nathan kept his distance from the Mist agents and turned his course toward Ghost World Island. Orochimaru's hidden laboratory lay there, far from the Sea Nation's principal isles, almost beyond its official borders. The remoteness ensured few ordinary travelers ever ventured this far, and only a handful of Mist Shinobi maintained a watch. All the better for Nathan, fewer witnesses and fewer obstacles to masking his presence. He allowed himself a small, confident smile as he pressed on into the island's uncharted waters. Nathan hovered above Ghost Realm Island, sweeping the terrain with his senses. Satisfied there was no immediate threat, he folded away his chakra wings and descended. Activating Wind Style, Wind Wings, he drifted into the dense forest, extending his awareness in every direction as he hunted for the hidden entrance to the underground base. An hour slipped by. Still nothing. Frustration coiled in Nathan's chest. Ghost Realm Island wasn't enormous, but without a clue or map, this search was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. His memories from a past life didn't offer any shortcuts or secret blueprints. He clenched his fists, teeth grinding. Integrating the Byakugan into my reconnaissance would have made this trivial, he muttered. With the Byakugan's X-ray vision, he could have located tunnels or cavern entrances in an instant. Instead, he was stumbling through undergrowth, blind to anything below the surface. If only I'd managed to transplant the Byakugan, he sighed. Nathan paused mid-step and closed his eyes. He took a slow, steady breath and summoned every last drop of chakra in his body. Then, with a sharp exhale, he unleashed it all at once, sending a pulse of energy radiating outward through the forest floor, ready to reveal whatever lay hidden beneath. The instant Nathan unleashed his chakra, a crushing aura rippled outward from him, swallowing the island in oppressive silence. Insects and birds froze mid-song. Even mosquitoes, stunned by the force, dropped lifelessly to the ground. Any ninja caught in that wave would quake, not out of defiance or grudging respect, but from pure, primal terror. Far beyond the epicenter, those sensitive enough to sense chakra shivers found themselves growing uneasy. Exactly the reaction Nathan needed. As long as there were operatives in the hidden underground base, they'd have no choice but to investigate this sudden power surge. Once they surfaced, he could track them back to their lair. It was a blunt strategy, and it did raise he risk of exposing himself, but he had no better options. He simply couldn't afford to burn another hour or more searching in the dark. Moments ticked by under the heavy air. Then, as Nathan had anticipated, a lone figure finally crested the rise to confront him. But when the newcomer stepped into view, Nathan's brow furrowed in suspicion. This was no random scout. Nathan paused at the edge of the clearing, his senses alert. Moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, illuminating two figures clad in black robes and featureless masks as they stepped into view. He narrowed his eyes. "Anbu?" he asked, suspicion lacing his voice. The pair froze, then one of them spoke in a measured, brittle tone. "Uchiha Nathan, what are you doing out here?" Their words were polite enough, but the chill in their voices set his teeth on edge. Nathan inhaled slowly, committing their chakra signatures to memory. He'd faced Anbu operatives before, and these weren't they. The aura he felt now was tighter, colder, unmistakably Root, Danzo's covert division. A grim smile tugged at Nathan's lips. He'd harbored doubts about confronting Anbu directly, but Root operatives left him no such compunction. In his sights they had become, and in his way they would be removed. With that resolve, he drew his slender longsword in a single fluid motion. The steel rang out sharply in the night as he prepared to unleash his instant sword technique. Before he could move, a flurry of shuriken whistled through the air, forcing him to shift his stance. The two Root ninjas behind them, silent shadows, had already begun their assault. Nathan's heart thumped with anticipation. There would be no hesitation tonight, only the clash of blades and the echo of battle under the moonlit trees. They must have sensed his murderous intent, because the Root operatives struck in unison. But with the Sharingan's keen perception, Nathan immediately noticed the shuriken's unnatural hue and picked up the faint metallic tang of poison on the air. Typical Root tactics, lethal traps hidden in every thrown weapon. Still, no amount of conspiracy could prevail against raw power. Focusing his chakra, Nathan unleashed the instant sword technique. A flash of emerald light rippled over him as he blurred out of the shuriken's path. At the same moment, he angled his body and closed in on one of the ninjas. The man panicked and tossed a kunai in response. Only Nathan heard the soft shh of a burning fuse attached to its shaft. Deploying a detonator at point-blank range? Reckless, Nathan muttered under his breath. Before the talisman could ignite, he twisted away, abruptly widening the gap between himself and the explosive blade. Now fully alert to their poisoned arsenal, Nathan weighed his options. These ninjas were skilled and ruthless, but he'd survived far more dangerous ambushes. With a steely grin, he prepared to turn their own weapons against them and show Root that no trap, however fiendish, could halt his blade. Boom! A violent explosion ripped through the forest, a flash of flame followed by a shockwave that rattled every tree in the clearing. Seizing the moment, Nathan vanished in a blur as he unleashed his instant sword technique, closing the distance on the Root ninja who had just thrown the kunai. Although the opponent had narrowly dodged the detonating talisman's blast, he still staggered from the force of the shockwave. He planted his feet, sweeping his arm down from its raised guard just in time to catch sight of Nathan's blade slicing toward him. Even faced with such sudden peril, he remained composed, stepping back to buy himself a precious few heartbeats worth of time. Before Nathan could strike again, another Root ninja, attracted by the commotion, leaped into view. He slammed his palm forward, fingers weaving rapidly into a hand seal, preparing to unleash a powerful ninjutsu. Nathan's blade hummed in his hand as he readied himself for the next attack, the tension in the air crackling like static. Chapter 476, The Solution. Nathan spun around the moment he sensed his opponent's movement. He activated his Sharingan and pushed its power to the limit, scrutinizing every subtle shift in stance and hand motion. When the final seal ended on the yin sign, he knew a fire escape ninjutsu was imminent. He braced himself to unleash Suiton, Water Array Wall, intending to smother the incoming blaze. But before he could form any jutsu, he felt an eerie ripple of chakra brush against him, an unmistakable warning. Danger flared in his gut. Abandoning the fight back, he veered off and dove behind a nearby oak. No sooner had he cleared that spot than a roaring fireball burst into being where he just stood, igniting the undergrowth with sizzling cracks. If he hadn't dodged at the last second, the sphere would have struck him square in the chest. Even with Nathan's ironclad constitution, the impact would have left him grievously burned. Nathan felt a chill creep up his spine. You can never afford to underestimate your enemies, especially these Gu-raised ninja. Then something clicked. The jutsu he'd just seen, it was unmistakable. A secret Anbu technique from Konoha, fire style, Sushin no Jutsu, designed to ignite targets from afar. When Nathan had mastered his initial fire style ninjutsu, he dreamed of learning a few more unusual techniques. Fire style, Sushin no Jutsu had topped that list, yet he'd never had the opportunity until now. Though the enemy's display hadn't been particularly spectacular, it was enough. Through his Sharingan, Nathan had watched every hand seal, every swirl of chakra. That was all the Sharingan needed to activate its copying ability. In other words, he just memorized the entire fire style, Sushin no Jutsu technique. A small, satisfied smile tugged at his lips. Fortune, it seemed, had finally shone in his favor. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment and summoned his proficiency panel. Sure enough, a new entry had appeared. Fire style. Scorching technique, Level 1, 100. Level 1 barely qualified as a combat skill. Its only conceivable use would be creating illusions, the kind Kakashi employs. But that was a non-starter. These root operatives were battle-hardened veterans. They wouldn't fall for a fleeting genjutsu, and even if they did, their specialized training would snap them out of it almost instantly. Besides, Nathan was up against two opponents working in perfect tandem. Kakashi's one-on-one tactics simply wouldn't apply. And truthfully, he didn't need to overthink the situation. Though highly skilled, these two were at most seasoned special jonin. Against an elite shinobi like Nathan, they might hold their own against typical jonin, or even escape unscathed, but not here, not now. Taking a deep breath, Nathan dismissed the distractions. He refocused all his energy and attention on the two root ninjas before him, ready to end this encounter swiftly and decisively. Nathan's heart pounded as he yanked several kunai from his pouch and hurled them at the root shinobi, interrupting his ninjutsu and sending him skidding backward through the air. In that instant, a green aura flared around Nathan. He'd activated the instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he materialized before his adversary, blade drawn. The shinobi barely managed to raise a kunai in time, and the long sword bit into it with a sharp clang. Nathan pivoted, sheathed his sword in one fluid motion, and unleashed the instant sword technique again. His form dissolved from sight, and then reappeared at the shinobi's right flank. Wind nature chakra surged into the long sword, sharpening its edge to an almost imperceptible razor. With a single precise slash, Nathan's blade swept across the shinobi's neck. A gust of razor-sharp wind tore at the skin, drawing blood before the man could even register the strike. Jiju didn't panic for a second. In a blink, he shifted his grip on the kunai and thrust it straight at Nathan. Not to kill him outright, but to force him on the defensive, to make him hesitate and buy himself time to escape. Would Nathan really trade his own life for his opponent's? Of course not. But he wasn't about to stand down either. As the kunai lunged toward him, green chakra flared around Nathan's body. He unleashed the perfected instant sword technique once more, vanishing and reappearing so swiftly there was barely a moment's pause. The blade whooshed through the space he'd occupied seconds before, missing him by mere inches. The effort left him panting, but he was still in the fight. Chiju's chest tightened as he tried to pinpoint Nathan's new location. Before he could, a cold prickle ran down his spine. Without a moment's hesitation, he sprang forward, disappeared behind a shattered stone pillar, and traced a hand through the air, sealing his next move. Substitute technique activated. Nathan's speed caught Jiju completely off guard. With a single, fluid motion, Nathan's long sword slashed across Jiju's back, carving a deep, bloody gash. Crimson droplets splattered the ground. Stifling the pain, Jiju muttered no protest. Instead, he activated his substitution technique, vanishing and reappearing a few paces away just as Nathan launched his second attack. Nathan's sharp eyes flicked to Jiju's new position, already preparing the instant sword technique to close the gap. In that moment, a roaring column of flame barreled toward him. Turning his head, he spotted a root ninja ahead, hands weaving rapid seals as fire spewed from his mouth. Instinctively, Nathan leapt back, narrowly avoiding the scorching blast. But the root ninja pressed his assault, spitting volley after volley of flame. Nathan twisted and rolled aside with lightning reflexes, evading each searing attack. The acrobatics gave him just enough time. Kneeling, he traced swift seals in the air and infused his chakra into one potent jutsu, water release, great shark bullet technique. In an instant, a towering shark of pure blue chakra roared into being and lunged straight at the wall of fire, its jagged fins cleaving through the inferno. Nathan had always known that water release held the upper hand against fire release. Now he proved it once more by unleashing his customized technique, water release, great shark bullet. In a heartbeat, a colossal water shark materialized before him, gaping maw swallowing the raging inferno jutsu whole. Its massive body billowed like a tidal wave as it surged toward the wounded root ninja in the distance. Seizing the moment, Nathan activated his instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he vanished and reappeared beside his staggered opponent, long sword poised. Beneath his poison wine mask, his face remained an unreadable mask of calm, his dark eyes gleaming with cold intent. Desperation drove the root ninja to a final gambit. Clutching a kunai, he lunged fiercely at Nathan, hoping to sacrifice himself to land a blow. But he was too slow. As the kunai whistled forward, Nathan's instant sword technique flared again. He was at the ninja's side before the kunai could find its mark, and with one precise, merciless stroke, he severed his enemy's head, ending the battle in a single, lethal arc. With a single fluid motion, Nathan's blade sliced through his opponent's throat. In an instant, blood spurted like a fountain, drenching the nearby ground in a vivid crimson tide. Chapter 477, Intelligence. The sight of his comrades falling around him spurred the root shinobi into flight, yet not out of fear. Root operatives didn't know such a luxury as cowardice. His only thought was to slip away and deliver what he'd learned back to HQ. He dashed forward, but his speed still couldn't match Nathan's. Almost before the ninja had fully committed to his escape, Nathan tapped into his instant sword technique. With a flash of steel, he outpaced the fleeing shinobi and dropped into his path, blocking the route with his blade drawn. Startled to see Nathan materialize, the root agent reacted instantly, slashing a kunai toward Nathan's throat in a single ruthless arc. Few ordinary shinobi could have matched that speed, but Nathan relied on his Sharingan. The crimson eye caught every subtle shift in the attacker's stance. Nathan leaned back, letting the blade whistle harmlessly past. Seeing his first strike thwarted, the root shinobi landed nimbly, crouched, then bounded backward. He drew a handful of kunai in rapid succession and flung them in a deadly volley, aiming at Nathan's torso, shoulders, and legs. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. Nathan's Sharingan tracked each thrown blade, calculating their trajectories. He raised his sword, deflecting the nearest 3 kunai in a blur of steel sparks, while a swift sidestep sent another harmlessly skittering into the sand. Yet 2 more blades came too quickly. One nicked his sleeve, the other grazed his hip, drawing a thin line of blood. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Even wounded, he stood his ground, ready to end the confrontation on his terms and extract the intelligence this shinobi carried. Nathan's Sharingan flared to life, the 3 magatama turning deep crimson as he pushed them to their limit. Time seemed to slow as the kunai screamed toward him. With unshakable calm, he slipped aside, evading 2 of the projectiles, and then he caught something that made his pulse quicken. Faint, nearly invisible wires trailed from the kunai's handles, their surfaces treated to absorb light so completely they wouldn't gleam even under the bright sun. A second glance through his enhanced vision revealed a faint sheen of toxin glistening on the steel filaments, and a subtle chemical tang hung in the air. Without the Sharingan's keen insight, Nathan would never have noticed the trap until it was too late. Those deadly wires formed a hidden net, anchored by the kunai themselves. If he'd charged forward, his speed would have been sapped the moment he stepped inside the snare. Even his signature instant sword technique wouldn't save him. He'd be nothing more than a fish in a barrel. Clever, he murmured, already calculating his next move. But not clever enough. And with that, Nathan readied himself to turn the tables on whoever had set this lethal ambush. By all rights, the moment Nathan saw something was off, he should have veered away. Instead, He paused only to confirm there was nobody watching, and then charged straight ahead without hesitation. The root ninja, poised behind his poison wire net, barely held back a startled curse. He'd laid this trap not to catch Nathan, but to slow him long enough to make his escape. He never expected Nathan, Sharingan ablaze, to blunder right into it. A flicker of doubt crossed the root ninja's face, but opportunity outweighed suspicion. He gave a swift tug on the steel cable he held, and the poisoned mesh in front of Nathan snapped taut, its spacing halved. Now no one could slip through. Nathan was trapped. Unless he ripped the wires apart by sheer force, there was no way out. Perfect. Now the root ninja could deliver the finishing strike. He jammed 2 kunai into the ground at his feet, anchoring the steel lines with a practiced twist. The trap locked solid. Nathan's jaw tightened as the net's barbs edged closer, but before he could summon his next move, the root ninja had already begun to melt back into the shadows, kunai at the ready. Nathan's hands moved in a blur as he formed the hand seals. He inhaled deeply, then expelled a gout of flame from his mouth. In an instant, fire roared to life, engulfing the wire mesh cage and swallowing its interior in blazing heat. 1 second passed. 2. Still, there was no movement, no sign of life. A cold dread crept through the root operative. Without hesitation, he ended the jutsu. The fire vanished, and the cage stood empty. Panic flared in the ninja's eyes as he spun on his heel, intent on escape. But before he could flee, 2 obsidian orbs appeared in his field of vision, like miniature dark suns. An irresistible force seized his mind and yanked him into a shimmering illusion. He struggled, heart pounding, but found himself powerless against the onslaught. In that moment of helplessness, realization struck him. He'd been ensnared by the Sharingan's genjutsu, specifically the legendary Mangekyo Sharingan, and there was no escaping its illusion Sharingan. Earlier, when Nathan spotted the shimmering poison net ahead, he immediately had 2 options: fall back and prolong the fight, or turn his enemy's own trap against him. Though he was loath to reveal his Mangekyo Sharingan, every use risked exposing his secret, he knew that hesitation now would only cost him more time and invite unforeseen complications. After all, there was an entire hidden base beneath the island. Who knew how many shinobi lay in wait? Rather than gamble on a drawn-out skirmish, Nathan chose swift decisiveness. He baited the root ninja into springing the trap, a mesh of venom-coated wires flanked by roaring flames, and in that moment, he struck. Unleashing his Mangekyo Sharingan, he activated the Heavenly Guardian technique. A ghostly aura flickered around him as he phased through the burning, poisonous net. Before his opponent could register what was happening, Nathan materialized at his back, kunai raised at the nape. By the time the root ninja realized his peril and tried to flee, it was already too late. Nathan activated his Sharingan's genjutsu with a single blink. The root shinobi before him immediately fell under his spell. Without hesitation, Nathan probed the soldier's mind, sifting through memories for the information he needed. Minutes ticked by, 7, maybe 8, before he finally released the jutsu. He opened his eyes and glanced over at the headless corpse lying a short distance away. The enchanted ninja remained motionless, lost in Nathan's illusion. Nathan murmured to himself, "It's all tied to Danzo." He'd suspected as much when he first faced these 2 operatives. This secret lab and its gruesome experiments reeked of Danzo's influence. Now he had proof. From the shinobi's memories, Nathan learned that Danzo had dispatched them to guard the base and to round up new test subjects for whatever twisted research was going on. But why would Danzo involve himself with Orochimaru's hidden facility? The answer was simpler than expected. Orochimaru was still officially part of Root, which meant he couldn't hide his genetic experiments from the organization. Danzo had sent his men here to keep an eye on Orochimaru's work and perhaps seize any breakthroughs for himself. With this revelation in hand, Nathan knew exactly where to turn next. Nathan watched the horizon as the sea breeze carried the distant scent of rain. The Rain Country's daimyo was preoccupied with affairs at home, leaving these covert operations largely to local commanders. Naturally, the 2 allied factions had fallen into an uneasy partnership, but Nathan paid little mind to their politics. What mattered was that his journey had yielded results. Though the shinobi from Root wasn't a medical researcher and knew nothing about human body modification, Nathan had harvested exactly the intelligence he needed from the ninja's implanted memories. He'd identified 2 hidden entry points to the facility, one nestled in a rocky cove on the island, the other submerged just offshore, and both were virtually untraceable. Even the internal guard rotations, trap placements, and the base's overall layout had been laid bare before him. Clutching that knowledge, Nathan fell to a surge of confidence. Infiltration wouldn't be a matter of brute force, but of precision and timing, and he had both in abundance. Chapter 478, Infiltration. Nathan crouched in the moonlit dunes just beyond the Hidden Leaf's eastern wall. 2 root operatives lay trapped in the unbreakable genjutsu of his Mangekyo Sharingan, teetering as if in a waking dream. Before slipping past their patrol, he had one final task. He moved to the first shinobi and formed the seals for the chakra absorption technique. Such potent chakra! Too good to waste, he murmured, pressing his palm against the man's chest. In an instant, a silvery stream of energy siphoned into Nathan's meridians, followed by waves of mental resolve and physical strength. The body of the root ninja went limp, never stirring as his life force drained away. Without pause, Nathan shifted to the second agent and repeated the process. Again, the captive's chakra, willpower, and vitality surged into Nathan, leaving only a vacant husk behind. Satisfied that he'd claimed every scrap of power, he sealed another set of hand signs. Fire release, ash propagation. A roaring sphere of flame blossomed around the 2 empty bodies. Under Nathan's steady supply of chakra, the inferno burned hotter, consuming them until only ashes remained. A brisk sea breeze swept across the sands, scattering the gray dust until not a trace of the root operatives was left. Nathan drew his cloak tighter, slipped through the gap in the patrol line, and vanished into the darkness of the village. With the perimeter neutralized, the true infiltration could begin. Nathan no longer had to worry about anyone detecting something strange in his body. Confident in his disguise, he pulled back his gaze and plunged into the forest, following the mental map he'd committed to memory. Before long, he emerged at the rear of a low, vine-draped mountain. Half hidden in the shadows was a narrow cave, the secret entrance to the underground base beneath Ghostworld Island. Nathan paused to consider his options. The base did have a second access point, an underwater passage nearby, but it was treacherous and time-consuming. He had no reason to risk it. Instead, he turned his full attention to the cave's dark mouth, took a steadying breath, and formed a series of hand seals. With a sharp burst of chakra, he activated the shadow clone technique. A swirl of smoke condensed beside him, and when it cleared, a perfect double stood at his shoulder. The 2 Nathans exchanged a brief, knowing nod. In unison, they molded their chakra once more, sealing their hands to perform the transformation technique. In an instant, the original Nathan shifted into the guise of the root ninja, whose identity he'd painstakingly memorized, codenamed Chi, while his clone became the operatives known as Jiju. Now, perfectly posing as members of the base's inner circle, they slipped silently into the cavern's entrance, ready to see what lay within. Nathan and his shadow clone double-checked their gear one last time, then slipped into the cave in single file. At first, the tunnel was low and narrow, but as they pressed deeper, it gradually widened and began to slope downward. Though Nathan had already surveyed this place through Chi's memories, nothing compared to actually standing here. Every echo, every drip of water, set his nerves on edge. With senses pricked for danger, Nathan and his clone advanced cautiously. A few minutes later, they came to the edge of a sheer drop. Far below them, a ribbon of inky black water wound its way through the rock. Without a word, Nathan signaled to his clone, channeled chakra into the soles of his feet, and ran down the cliff face as if gravity didn't exist. They landed lightly on a narrow ledge at the riverbank, then plunged into the cold, dark water. Swimming against the current, they followed an underwater passage until it opened into a hidden cavern. There, at the heart of the grotto, lay a vast pool, and beneath its surface, the secret entrance to the enemy's underground base. Nathan inhaled, gathered chakra in his lungs, and dove. His clone mirrored every movement, and together they emerged inside a dimly lit chamber. Before they could take another step, 2 figures exploded from the shadows, kunai held at the ready. "Who's there?" one of them snapped, eyes darting between Nathan and his identical doppelganger. Nathan stared at the two figures before him. Their ragged clothing hung in tatters, and their exposed flesh shimmered unnaturally, overlaid with iridescent fish scales. Experimental subjects, he realized with a start. Flashing back to the memories of his fellow root ninja, he recalled everything he needed to know about them. They were both test subjects from this very base, known only by their designations. He didn't recall their real names, only number 7 and number 8. 7, 8, Nathan said, keeping his voice calm. What are you doing here? At the sound of their code names, the two immediately froze in place. Their eyes darted to Nathan and the shadow clone standing beside him. After a tense moment, number 8 spoke in a trembling voice. Master Jiju, Master Chi, it was Master Kazuhiko who sent us. He noticed you and the clone were overdue and ordered us to come find you. Kazuhiko? Nathan echoed, brow furrowing. The name rang a bell. Dr. Kimura Kazuhiko, head researcher at this base and a loyal operative of the Root organization. Nathan remembered from Chi's memories that Kazuhiko was fanatically devoted to Danzo and prone to extreme methods. Under Orochimaru's direction, he had overseen countless grotesque experiments here. Nathan exhaled slowly. Nothing about this place was safe, and the presence of these two subjects, and what they'd endured, only underscored how far Dr. Kimura was willing to go in the name of progress. He squared his shoulders and addressed them firmly. Stay close. We need to move. But first, tell me everything Kazuhiko-san said. Number 7 swallowed hard, looking from Nathan to the hidden eyes of the shadow clone. He said there's urgent research at the East Wing, he stammered. He wants you to inspect a new development, but he didn't say what it is. Nathan nodded. Then that's where we're headed. Chi, you're with me. Keep watch for traps. He looked back at the two subjects. And you two, be ready to defend yourselves. This base has grown more dangerous than ever. As they moved off together through the dimly lit corridor, Nathan's mind raced. Kazuhiko's urgent research could mean any number of horrors. But one thing was certain. Whatever awaited them in the East Wing, he'd be ready. Nathan had little use for thoughts of Tianji's future. At 15 or 16, the boy's talents were undeniable, but he lacked the experience to stand on his own. Only after Orochimaru's inevitable defection, when the base was abandoned, would Tianji be in a position to seize full control. That, however, was a concern for another day. Right now, Nathan's sole objective was to capture Kimura Kazuhiko and bring the entire facility under his command. He turned to the two base guards standing before him, once experimental subjects, now his unflinching sentries, and announced, "The situation has been resolved. The alarm is lifted." "Yes, Master Nathan," they replied in perfect unison, voices steady with loyalty and devoid of dissent. Nathan inclined his head, then fixed them with a colder stare. "Where is Kimura Kazuhiko now?" "In experimental area number 3, Your Excellency," they answered together. At the mention of Area 3, both guards' voices trembled ever so slightly. Nathan recognized the reason at once. According to the memories of the Root Shinobi codenamed Red, experimental area number 3 was where the adult fusion trials took place, the very chamber where these two men had been transformed. And now, with that chilling knowledge in mind, he was one step closer to tightening his grip on the base. Nathan stood before the heavy doors of Experimental Zone 3, his gaze tracing the faded markings that labeled the base's 4 research areas. Zone 1 specialized in embryonic fusion, Zone 2 in infant integration, Zone 3, where he now presided, handled adolescent subjects, and Zone 4 conducted non-human baby, iogenetic grafts. More than 2 years, and nearly 3 of brutal war, had tempered Nathan's spirit into iron resolve. Yet even he could not erase the lingering nausea that rose in his chest whenever he recalled the screaming test subjects and the twisted scientists who'd overseen their torture. "Those monsters deserve to die," he whispered. The 2 junior officers standing before him exchanged uneasy looks, clearly straining to catch his words. "My lord?" one finally ventured. Nathan blinked, forced himself to breathe evenly, and straightened his shoulders. With a small shake of his head, he dismissed the interruption. "It's nothing. You're dismissed." "Yes, Lord Jiju," they replied in unison, bowing. As they turned to leave, both men abruptly halted, pressing trembling hands to the back of their necks. A flash of agony swept through them, and within seconds they crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Nathan watched their bodies slump, expression unreadable. He tapped a hidden communicator at his wrist. "Secure them," he ordered quietly, "and prepare Zone 3 for the next phase." As the echo of approaching boots filled the corridor, Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself against the memories that would never fade, and the cruel tasks still to come. Nathan shook his head as he looked down at the two men he'd just incapacitated. "Raw power means nothing without proper training," he murmured. By the steady hum of their chakra, he could tell both men had reserves on par with an average chunin. On paper, they should have been formidable, but in practice, they were no match for even a modestly skilled chunin from any of the 5 great nations. Without disciplined control, their strength barely eclipsed that of a genin, and their only real edge lay in water, where amphibious ninjas could leverage the currents to their advantage. Kimura Kazuhiko had placed them on base guard duty, reasoning that it was better to put their untapped talent to use rather than let it go to waste. To their credit, they'd taken the assignment seriously, patrolling the perimeter, intercepting intruders, and whenever Poison Wine or Akka were away, acting as Kimura's enforcers to snatch up test subjects for his experiments. They'd transformed from victims into perpetrators. Nathan felt no remorse. Men who turned their backs on compassion in exchange for cruelty didn't earn his mercy. Chapter 479, Exposure and Capture. Nathan refused to let anything go to waste. With measured calm, he formed the requisite hand seals and unleashed the chakra absorption technique once more. In moments, the chakra sustaining the two figures collapsed into emptiness. Their life forces were drawn dry, extinguished as swiftly as a dying flame. He'd briefly considered incinerating their bodies with a fire style, great fireball technique to erase every trace, but he abandoned the thought. These two had been nothing more than disguises, mastered through his own transformation technique and that of his shadow clone. Even if someone noticed something amiss, it would lead nowhere. Besides, once he departed this facility, its very existence was in question. Any corpses left behind would serve only to slow him down. With deliberate efficiency, Nathan concealed the lifeless forms in a darkened corner, sweeping rubble and debris over them until they were hidden from view. Consulting the mental imprint gifted by the root operative known only as Red, he confirmed his route and set off toward Laboratory Sector 3. The hallways stretched ahead like a silent gauntlet. Halfway there, distorted shapes lunged from the shadows, guards transformed from failed experiments, their flesh grotesquely warped, eyes glowing with unnatural hunger. Nathan's expression hardened. He struck without hesitation. A flick of his wrist severed a grotesque arm, a precise thrust shattered a malformed spine. In rapid succession, each abomination fell, collapsing into discarded shells of sinew and bone. When the last guard hit the ground, Nathan paused only long enough to wipe his blade clean. No one remained to stand in his way. Steeling himself, he continued down the corridor, every step bringing him closer to the heart of the base and to the answers he sought. Nathan hesitated at the threshold of Experimental Area 3. If these people had remained mere test subjects, he might have shown mercy, perhaps even set them free. But they'd chosen to side with the root ninja. That choice alone was enough to seal their fate. He didn't need their explanations. His own anger was more than sufficient. Unhappiness was reason enough to strike. He and his shadow clone slipped silently through the dimly lit corridor, dispatching every guard in their path. In moments, they stood before a vast chamber that looked less like a laboratory and more like a high-security prison. Rows of iron bar cells lined the walls. Inside, civilian captives huddled together. Scaly patches marred their flesh, and their life energy flickered erratically. Some were barely clinging to life, while others lay dead on the cold floor, exuding a foul, metallic stench. Nathan halted a few paces from the nearest cell. His clone melted into the shadows. The two of them advanced when a voice rang out from the far end of the room, calm yet unmistakably clear. "You've returned." Nathan's hand tightened on the hilt of his blade. He scanned the chamber and saw a stainless steel examination table under a lone spotlight. Upon it lay a middle-aged man, his body half covered in dark reptilian scales. Standing beside him was a solitary figure, cloaked in shadow but exuding an unmistakable air of authority. Nathan took a steadying breath and prepared himself for questions, answers, and the reckoning yet to come. Nathan recognized him immediately, Root Operative Red, otherwise known as Kimura Kazuhiko. Kazuhiko stood with his back to Nathan, absorbed in tinkering with some instruments. Nathan stepped forward and let out a soft, answering the unspoken question hanging in the air. Hearing the sound, Kazuhiko laid his tools aside and turned. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing flat-frame glasses and a white lab coat spattered with fresh blood. Without the stains, he might have passed for the friendly big brother next door. Instead, his calm eyes marked him as something far more dangerous. "Our test subjects are used up," Kazuhiko reported, brushing a smear of crimson off his sleeve. "Make sure we via fresh batch by morning." "Understood," Nathan replied with a dismissive snort, then swept past Kazuhiko and continued on his way. "Oh, right!" Kimura Kazuhiko suddenly exclaimed, as if he just remembered something. "What was that chakra fluctuation just now?" "Nothing," Nathan replied coolly, measuring the distance between them. He was ready to unleash his Sharingan and trap Kazuhiko in a genjutsu, until he noticed Kazuhiko's reaction. Kazuhiko's nostrils flared. His eyes narrowed to pinpricks as he stared Nathan down. "You're not Chai. Then who are you?" Nathan allowed himself a faint smirk. "Why don't you guess?" In an instant, he activated his Sharingan. Kazuhiko's shock and fury were immediate. "What?" he blurted, his own eyes snapping shut to block the illusion. He stumbled back, trying to escape the genjutsu's grip. Seeing his chance, Nathan drew the long sword strapped to his waist. A green aura of chakra ignited around him as he performed the instant sword technique. In a blur of emerald light, he vanished and reappeared at Kazuhiko's side. Swish! The blade arced through the air and bit deep into Kazuhiko's shoulder. Nathan deliberately avoided striking at life-threatening targets like the neck or head. He needed Kimura Kazuhiko alive. He had to interrogate him. Although the Root Ninja codenamed Red possessed a wide breadth of knowledge, he'd never been deeply involved in the experiments themselves. He had no idea where the records were kept, or even if they existed. Only by capturing Kazuhiko could Nathan uncover the missing details. But holding back had its price. The moment Kazuhiko sensed Nathan's lethal intent, he snatched the scalpel lying within arm's reach. With uncanny reflexes, he defiantly intercepted Nathan's blade. Clang! Steel rang against steel as Nathan's long knife met the tiny scalpel. The force of the collision threw Kazuhiko off balance and sent him crashing to the ground. In that split second, Nathan's shadow clone dissolved into motion and reappeared beside the fallen ninja. Before Kazuhiko could recover, the duplicate's hand shot out. Snap! It closed around Kazuhiko's wrist, and an almost uncanny suction seemed to burst from its palm, yanking him forward. Bound by the clone's grip and powerless beneath its mysterious force, Kimura Kazuhiko realized he'd finally been caught. Nathan felt the chakra in his opponent's body burst like a broken dam, surging down his arm and then, just as suddenly, leaking out. "Damn!" Kimura Kazuhiko cursed under his breath. His face hardened. Wind-released chakra shimmered along the edge of the scalpel in his right hand. In an instant, he drove it down into his own left forearm, fracturing bone with a sickening crack. Then, as if his skeleton had liquefied, he twisted and slipped away from Nathan's counterstrike in an impossible, boneless motion. "Substitution jutsu?" Nathan muttered, narrowing his eyes. Kimura vanished in a swirl of dust, reappearing behind Nathan in a blink. But before he could land a blow, Nathan unleashed a sudden, explosive force of chakra that froze Kazuhiko in mid-lunge. That was the moment Nathan's shadow clone struck. A crackling blue orb of chakra, the Rasengan, materialized in the clone's palm and bore down on Kimura's back. Kimura howled in agony as the spinning sphere slammed into him, drawing startled looks from the other prison experiment subjects huddled in their cells. Nathan ignored the groaning prisoners. He slipped past Kimura's staggered form and drew his blade with a fluid motion, his flash sword technique. The blade sang through the air, a streak of steel aimed straight at Kimura's heart. Their eyes met. A crimson ripple flared in Nathan's left eye. He activated his Sharingan, the world shifting into an illusory haze at his command. In that instant, Kimura Kazuhiko realized he had walked straight into Nathan's trap, and that escape would be all but impossible. Nathan watched impassively as Kimura Kazuhiko's eyes fluttered shut and his consciousness slipped away. The researcher had put up a fight. His modified senses and heightened perception exceeded those of an average shinobi, but he was still no match for Nathan's mastery of illusions. It was only natural that he'd succumb. Nathan didn't rush to probe Kimura's memories. Instead, he turned to his shadow clone standing silently at his side. "Take care of any loose ends in this base," he ordered. The clone inclined its head in a crisp nod. "Right away," it replied, dissolving into the darkness to hunt down remaining threats. Left alone with the unmoving researcher, Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. With Kimura Kazuhiko securely under his control, every secret inside this facility, from hidden experiments to classified data, was now within his reach. He leaned forward, ready to harvest the intelligence he'd come for. Chapter 480. Harvest and Departure. Ghost World Island, underground base, Kimura Kazuhiko's quarters. Nathan set the thick volume aside and pressed his fingertips to his temples. He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the underground lab fade into the background. Minutes ticked by as he wrestled with the flood of new information. Finally, his brow smoothed, and he opened the book again, muttering under his breath, "Knowledge can't be rushed. I'll have to take this step by step." It had been nearly 3 hours since he slipped into the base. His shadow clone had neutralized every unstable element in the facility, ensuring no alarms were raised. Meanwhile, Nathan had combed through Kimura's meticulously kept lab notes and experimental logs. The scientist's habit of recording every procedure and result, combined with Nathan's own library of reference texts, provided all the data he needed to understand human body transformation. There was no longer any reason to keep Kimura conscious or attempt a risky brain extraction. The recorded findings were far more reliable. Satisfied, Nathan flipped through the final pages and closed the book with care. He glanced toward the far corner of the room, where Kimura lay bound to a simple cot, still unconscious. The scientist's chest rose and fell with each even breath, unaware that his life's work had just been liberated. Nathan stood, gathering his notes and the disassembled components of his shadow clone. In a moment, he would slip away from this hidden fortress, knowledge in hand, and without leaving a trace. Nathan didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, formed the seal for the chakra absorption technique, and pressed his palm to the fallen shinobi's chest. In an instant, he drained every last drop of chakra, followed by spiritual energy and finally physical vitality. The man's life snuffed out like a candle in a draft, and only once the life force had completely ebbed did Nathan lift his hand. A surge of stolen chakra pulsed through him, and he allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. Raising both hands, he wove another seal and unleashed a torrent of flame, fire-style, Sushoku, sending a swirling fireball crackling down onto the corpse of Kimura Kazuhiko. The flames roared to life, consuming the body until nothing remained but black ash. Nathan exhaled, then blew the ashes aside in a single, practiced puff. With the threat fully eliminated, he turned his attention to packing up. Mid-afternoon light slanted through the trees, and he knew he needed to be back at Blackstone's stronghold before night fell. Tonight, reconnaissance duties awaited him in Feiyu Town, and he couldn't afford to linger out here any longer. He methodically gathered his weapons, refilled his gourd with water, and checked his ninja scrolls one last time. Satisfied that everything was in order, Nathan slung his pack over his shoulder. As he set off down the forest path, the distant rumble of thunder warned him that darkness and new challenges were not far behind. Nathan surveyed the cluttered work table. Stacks of books and scrolls, a handful of experimental tools and instruments, and various medicinal supplies. He exhaled in relief. "Good thing I mastered the sealing array," he muttered. "Otherwise, crafting a scroll like this would be a nightmare." With that, he unrolled a blank scroll, dipped his brush in ink, and began to inscribe the intricate patterns. Sealing techniques translate ninjutsu, illusions, and containment spells into written symbols. In theory, anyone who knows the conversion rules can create a functional scroll, but those rules are notoriously complex, which is why each pre-made scroll carries such a high price. Nathan, however, had already learned the sealing array inside and out, so he tackled the task confidently rather than scrambling at the last minute. 3 minutes later, he stepped back and examined his work. The delicate interlocking glyphs glowed faintly on the parchment. The sealing array was complete, and ready for action. Nathan watched in awe as the once blank scroll before him read to life, its surface now etched with strange winding sigils. He let out a relieved breath, set aside his brush and inkstone, and steadied his mind for the delicate work ahead. Drawing on the instructions inscribed at the edge of the scroll, Nathan began to form the hand seals of the sealing array. Having never attempted it before, his movements were cautious and measured, far from swift. He followed each step the scroll prescribed almost mechanically, fingers tracing patterns he barely understood. Still, progress came. Gathering a fresh surge of chakra, he poured it into the scroll's center. Immediately, the engraved symbols ignited with faint blue light, snaking outward like living vines. In an instant, the seals expanded and draped themselves over the pile of relics Nathan had prepared beside him. Sensing the moment was right, he reshaped his seals and called out, "Seal!" With a rush of energy, the glyphs recoiled as though tugged by invisible hands, pulling every trace of power and the objects themselves back into the scroll. When the light faded, the clutter of relics was gone, and in their place one bold character gleamed: Seal. Nathan allowed himself a triumphant nod. The first sealing had succeeded. Nathan shook his head again, partly in satisfaction, partly in frustration. He'd just completed a sealing scroll, a respectable feat, yet his own doubts nagged at him. If his skills were sharper, he could bind spirits to any object in an instant, without even drawing runic lines. Someday, he thought, he might even open a pocket dimension and trap them in thin air. But that was a long way off. "Patience," he murmured with a wry smile, recalling the old proverb, "You can't eat hot tofu in a hurry." His proficiency gauge was climbing steadily. With gradual practice, every technique would fall into place. There was no need to rush. Rolling up the scroll, Nathan slipped outside. Down the corridor, several shadow clones he'd summoned earlier trained silently, their identical forms tracing intricate seals and hand signs. Judging by the smoothness of their movements, they'd been at it for the full 3 hours. Perfect timing, Nathan thought. He raised a steady hand, centered his chakra, and whispered, "Shadow clone technique." In an instant, his form split, drowning the hallway in dozens of Nathans, each poised and ready for the next drill. Bang! A billow of chakra smoke erupted, and every shadow clone on the field dissolved instantly. At the same moment, a surge of chakra flooded Nathan's body, accompanied by a fresh influx of training experience and memories. He closed his eyes, drawing all that new information inward. For a full 15 minutes, he sat motionless, mentally converting those gains into mastery ratings on his skill panel. When he finally opened his eyes, there was no change. None of his abilities had leveled up, not even the entry-level fire style, scorching technique. His recent chakra reserves were already stretched to the limit, so there was nothing left to invest. Accepting the fact, Nathan dismissed the panel and sprang to his feet. He made for the base's only access point, the combined entrance and exit, knowing that his shadow clones had cleared out any lingering threats. Freed from the caution he'd shown on his way in, he covered the corridor in just 5 or 6 minutes. Soon he emerged in the underground cavern that housed the pool. Dim, emerald-tinted lights played across the water's surface as Nathan paused, catching his breath. Ahead lay the shimmering basin that might offer rest, or perhaps another challenge. He squared his shoulders and started toward it, ready for whatever came next. Finally, surveying the base, Nathan murmured, "It's about time."